Hello, everybody. Today is Friday, March 16th, and we bring you Block Digest number 88 at block height 513,813. And today we have a special guest with us, Mr. Jim Bell, who actually originated the idea of assassination markets and started the discussion, I guess, of the politics of assassination. You want to say hi to everybody, Jim?
Yeah, hi, Jim Bell here. Should I give you a little bit of background on myself, or?
Yeah, okay, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I've known I was a libertarian for 43 years. I've actually been a libertarian all my life. In 1995, I wrote the first part of my assassination politics essay, which got me a lot of publicity and got me into a little trouble with the federal government. I have a new idea that I presented first in Acapulco a month ago, and I'd be happy to discuss it.
All right, so in addition to Jim, we've got the regular cast of Mr. Rick, our resident meme master.
Hey, everybody. I hope you are having a good Friday. That's right. Weekend coming up.
JW.
Hey, everybody.
And Miss Janine with a new and improved avatar.
Yeah, I guess you have to point that out. Hello.
All right, so I guess JW, if you want to take over as showmaster for this first bit, we can get into Jim's new idea.
Yeah, so actually I talked with Jim, I guess about 2 weeks ago, trying to get just a better idea of the history of the cypherpunk movement and kind of how he was related to it, and his idea around private security and law that I thought was pretty interesting. But he's got a new project, and I don't know a ton about it. Just chatted with him a little bit here and there over the last couple of weeks, and really looking forward to hearing more about it. So if you want, Jim, just kind of give us an overview of what you're working on, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I've long believed that libertarianism needs a project. It's all right that it goes ahead and runs candidates, but the problem is something called Duverger's law, which basically says that in a system with a first past the post election system, third-party candidates are very much impeded. So I have an idea to shut down the federal criminal justice system, at least drop its number of people it can convict from approximately 77,000 per year to perhaps 5,000 or 6,000 per year. It's legal. It's going to cost a bit of money, but it's a project that libertarians, I believe, should get into. It involves the idea of raising money and offering it to any new federal criminal defendant who agrees to not plead guilty, but in fact plead innocent, demand a trial, and get that trial. The amount of money I'm currently working on in terms of the projection is like $3,000. And I believe that if enough, background, they only put on 2,500 trials per year and convict 77,000. Well, they don't have the ability to put more than about 3,500 to 4,000 people on trial. They have a limited number of courtrooms. They have a limited number of personnel, investigators, prosecutors, and so forth.
So I hate to interrupt, but why would we want to convict less criminals? If we're convicting 77,000 criminals a year, it sounds like that's a good thing, and you're trying to put more bad guys on the street.
Well, okay, 75% of the people charged in the federal criminal system are charged for what libertarians would call victimless crimes, specifically drugs, money laundering, illegal gun possession, and illegal entry in immigration. That's 75%. Now, generally speaking, libertarians don't believe in the idea of prosecuting victimless crimes. If a crime doesn't have a victim, it isn't a crime. Now, if you eliminated that 75%, presumably they could increase the number of victim crimes that they are prosecuting. And that would be one way of actually getting more actual criminals off the street. So, but the first step is to put them in a position where they have to negotiate. The federal government will be forced to negotiate. It'll be shut down, I believe, to convicting maybe about 5,000 people a year. There are still going to be some people that take plea agreements, but it'll be much less. Currently, 99% of the people charged are eventually convicted. The vast majority of them, 95%, actually just take a plea. Well, if I give everybody a reason to not take that plea, then the number of people that they can convict will be dropped to a little bit more than the number of trials that they can put on. So between 77,000 going to 5,000 a year is a big hobbling of the system. And once negotiations start, the first thing we'll say is you can't convict any victimless crimes anymore. So that'll be 75% of the crimes will simply no longer be eligible, at least according to current statistics. And there will also be some other conditions added, I believe. And effectively, we will hobble the federal government in its ability to harass victimless crime committers. And that would be, not only would it save a huge amount of money, I estimate approximately 18 billion a year in both prison cost and investigation cost and prosecution cost. But it will also keep out of prison people who probably shouldn't be there at all. This promotes, I believe, the libertarian ideal.
Right. I see where you're going with that, because like there's a lot of cases that get tried where, don't, like you're saying, it's a victimless crime, and the case really should have never really gotten to the trial system in the courts. And I'm curious, like, do you think like it would just be like broad, like every one of these non-victimless crimes, or would it be like like a panel basically just to review? I mean, like, I guess you can't even really review these. There's so many of these, like, to where there is like a good chance that the person is innocent, and like it would be, he doesn't, because there are some of these where, I wouldn't say like the punishments that are going to be handed down are always just, but there usually is like some sort of fine or something where maybe like let me see, the illegal immigration and drugs and stuff like that. I'm not saying like, there should be like people put in prison for these things. It's just like maybe there should be some sort of penalty to where there is some sort of trial system there for some of these people. Or is it just like a blanket towards all these victimless crimes? Like that's what the funds are going to be supporting? Or is it like a group that's reviewing these, and the ones that seem likely they'll get those?
Well, I don't have a hard and fast plan that includes all that detail. Let me say that the first goal is to get the federal government forced into a position of negotiation. Well, I don't know whether you'd call it negotiation. They will simply have to agree, because if they can no longer convict 77,000 and it goes down to 5,000 a year, they will feel that their system is fallen apart. Initially, I would offer this deal to any defendant whatsoever, including victim crimes, simply because the purpose is to take down the existing system. But very quickly, possibly within a few months, but I would say within a year, the federal government will simply be forced to negotiate, and they will have to accept a changed system. Eliminating the victimless crimes from prosecution helps a lot. Ultimately, as I pointed out, the number of actual victim crimes can be increased. If you're not putting 75% of the people in prison for victimless crimes, hey, that leaves a little bit of room for actual victims. So again, I'm not trying to just eliminate their ability to punish crimes that have victims, or all of them. I just want to make sure that they can no longer prosecute and convict on victimless crimes.
So to kind of summarize, like your line of thinking here is effectively clog up the court system with so many trials that simply the social pressure would force them to prioritize exclusively things with actual victims, just because of how the social backlash would play out if they didn't prioritize things along those lines.
Basically, that's it. They will know immediately what it is that I want them to do. It's quite standard libertarian philosophy, and has been for nearly 50 years. It says that victimless crimes, by definition, are not a violation of people's, it doesn't violate the non-aggression principle. And by stopping that prosecution, the federal government will simply be bowing to reality. Let me give you the figures here. I estimate they'll be able to put on 3,500 to 4,000 trials if they work at it hard, opposed to the current 2,500. If the amount of reward given to each defendant who actually gets a trial is $3,000, that works out to somewhere around maybe $11 to $12 million a year. Now, whether or not $12 million a year sounds like a lot is dependent on what you think you're going to achieve. Is there $12 million out there in this country, or for that matter, the world, perhaps, if there's a reasonable probability of totally shutting down the federal system and eliminating victimless crime prosecution? I would say it's worth doing. And I also say that there are plenty of people in the world who would probably, if you ask them not in the public eye, would say they'd love to screw around with the federal government. They hate the federal government. And they can hate it for lots of different reasons, mutually incompatible reasons. But they will hate it, and they would love to be able to shut it down. Internet billionaires, Bitcoin billionaires, people like George Soros. I don't have a lot of respect for all of these kinds of people necessarily, but their money is as green as anybody's, and if they want to disrupt the current system, this is a marvelous way for them to do it. Now, the system can be set up so that donations are anonymous, so it doesn't get back to them. They're not blamed for a change. They anonymously donate maybe $1 million, and if you get 10 people anonymously donating $1 million, the system will be shut down for a year. There's a guy named Kim.com. I'm not kidding. There is such a guy. And he's currently worth, I think, about $300 million. And he's currently under threat of extradition to America from New Zealand. Well, if Kim.com wants to disrupt the federal criminal justice system for a year, all he needs to do is donate about 4% of his assets to the system, and it'll be shut down for a year. And he's just one person. There's large numbers of people out there who may want to prevent prosecution. Consider the various Silk Road clones that have occurred. Silk Road is the original Silk Road was a dark market, works off of Tor and encryption, and in principle, it allowed people to buy and sell large amounts of things. Most well known, of course, were the illegal drugs and so forth. Well, imagine you have the current system, whatever you call it. I don't follow the individual markets, but let's say it did $1 billion a year. Well, what if 1% of that gross was used to fund a federal, by the way, I call it the Federal Justice Shutdown Program. 1% of $1 billion would shut down the federal system for approximately 1 year. If you were using that system either as a customer or a seller or an operator, wouldn't you rather have the federal prosecution go from $77,000 a year to 5,000 a year? I certainly would. And this could be called, by the way. Okay, this could be called by. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. I've talked a lot.
It's like real quick. It's just like in the abstract, I really like this idea because, you know, like you pointed out earlier, there are a million different reasons to dislike government or of pretty much victimless crimes that the entire spectrum of the political parties, I think, would have large swaths of people who would agree with that. And I think, like, as an abstract idea, this is brilliant in that it's getting all of these disparate groups of people in alignment or agreement over something. And like, as far as the mechanics of the idea, like I feel the need to point out, although I would hope it would be obvious, that something like this, I think, would require Bitcoin or something like Bitcoin, because to try to do this with some more traditional system, I mean, in the instance of like a bank account, like your money can be frozen. If something like this was tried to be done with cash, I mean, obviously civil forfeiture allows police officers to seize arbitrary amounts of cash if they can just suspect it was illicit in its origin. And like that, it's nice to see like another idea from you to kind of use the framework of cryptocurrencies and actually try to improve the faults in the current system.
Yes. As most people these days know, Bitcoin is not anonymous, it's pseudonymous. It's like everybody's bank account was public except that the names were left off. You know, you can find out a lot of information that way. There are, however, a number of what might be called generically privacy coins. I think one is called Zero Cash, or, well, the original term was Zero Coin, but there's one called Zero Cash. And depending on how you send money with it, it could be absolutely anonymous. In principle, somebody could put in, money, any amount of money, and donate it without anybody knowing for sure who did. And that's part of the goal here. Obviously, there are a lot of people who have the kind of feedback, that negative feedback. They don't want to be harassed by the media or something. So they'd want to donate their money by anonymous means. And in principle, that is quite possible even today. I could get a donation today that was anonymous.
Yeah, and I mean, like, we can maybe get those, we can maybe set that up to where it could be through Bitcoin, because the only thing I'm thinking is just like, like Shinobi's saying, this is a great idea that can expand across a broad range of people, and like in that there'll definitely be some people where the financial incentive, like the darknet markets, like there's like a purpose of that drug wars kind of helping fund that ability, that market there is there because of that. And so I could see like not everybody agreeing with it on that side, but I do see a lot of Bitcoiners, agreeing with this, and like you're saying, strong libertarians, and I could just see it definitely coming together where if you had like a multi-sig wallet donation address, so where like just a donation address at first, but I mean like, yeah, like if you were putting together something like this, I could see it where Bitcoin would serve a strong purpose in the middle of it, because I just see like those anonymous coins, they usually run in tandem with those darknet markets. And, there is a way to where like you can move Bitcoin around anonymously. So I think that if just the Bitcoin donation address probably would, like a lot of Bitcoiners could probably raise that money fairly easily. I think that it is an interesting idea because like Shinobi was saying, it could clog up the system and really just sort of expose how inefficient it really is.
And sorry, but I just wanted to say real quick, like I really like this idea because, I mean, when I look at your notion of an assassination market, I mean, I acknowledge that at this point with something like Bitcoin out in the world, it's an inevitability, but it's just personally, I see a potential for that to be misused for other ends than what you intended it for. And taking that into account, I really like to see an idea like this that I really can't at the moment find a way to kind of pervert or misuse it in a way where it's accomplishing a different ends than you set out to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. This project, by the way, it already has a primitive website, fedjusticeshutdown.org, FED justiceshutdown.org. Like I say, it's very primitive right now. It just came into existence a few weeks ago. I'm trying to put together a bunch of workers. Once I can start collecting donations, I can actually afford maybe 5 or 6 employees and start the project up. It, in principle, could start up in about a month and a half, subject only to getting the money together. And like I said, it'll probably cost about $12 million a year. How long it has to go on before the feds cry uncle and say, we give up, I don't know. I think 6 months minimum, probably 1 year maximum, because I expect there to be literally hundreds, if not thousands, of articles publicizing the concept. And it'll be such a black eye for the federal government that they won't have any choice but to negotiate.
Yeah, it would certainly be interesting to see how fast they come to the table on that, and how, you know, long they're willing to drag it out to see. Because I mean, like they stand to make a lot of money the way that system runs right now with the drug war, and, you know, penalizing a lot of different people and sort of setting the way things are. So it would be interesting to see how far they drag it out. I could almost see them going for like a year to 2. But like you're saying, I mean, they might be very quick. The reactionary might be spread like wildfire, and it could happen quicker than I'm imagining.
I believe that once the publicity starts, the articles appear, the news items show up, that will make it even easier to fund. I mean, anybody who hates how the federal government does its thing will say, aha, now I know I can actually anonymously help shut part of it down, a very important part of it down. Ultimately, prosecution is the one way they can individually go after people. Taxes are well, libertarians believe that taxation is theft, but taxation is just a general impediment on the entire population. But they can't really direct individuals or attack individuals except by something called prosecution. And if you cut your number of people prosecuted from 77,000 to 5,000, it will pretty much shut down their ability to go after drug dealers, tax evaders, money launderers, illegal reentry. You know, for example, the liberals don't like the idea of prosecuting illegal aliens. Sorry, I call them illegal aliens. But I accept the fact that there's going to be a lot of them who are going to hate the system so badly, they're going to be donating millions of dollars just to get the system to be unable to prosecute those individuals. Now, they'll still be able to check them over the fence if they want to do that. They just won't be able to prosecute them for a criminal offense. So I think it's ultimately a wonderful solution for people of many different political philosophies. Libertarians, of course, anarchists, liberals, everybody's going to find a reason to want to see the system shut down. I don't know whether I should be saying this, but even countries like Russia and China, who show their desire to screw with our system occasionally, might welcome an ability to donate a few tens of millions of dollars and just cause this to occur too. Unlocking all this merely requires publicity. It's sort of a chicken and egg problem. If I had a friendly billionaire who could afford this for a year, he could start it up, and once it starts, it would be self-fulfilling. It would, in fact, fund itself, more or less.
Mm-hmm. And to kind of comment on, the potential for other states to use this, I mean, that's also kind of a two-way street. Anywhere you have a justice system with at least some semblance of due process or integrity, like anywhere where there is a system like that, any other state or outside system could attempt to exert influence in the same way. So it's something that is more broadly applicable than just the United States.
Yeah, well, what I'm referring to specifically now is the federal criminal justice system. The collective size of the state criminal justice systems is about 10 times that of the federal. Assuming this thing works successfully, the next step is the state systems. Now, probably more of the state systems people are prosecuted for victim crimes, but there's still going to be a large amount of drugs and money laundering prosecutions that that need to be addressed. And if the federal system shutdown system works, I feel quite confident there will be enough reason to go to the state systems. If for no other way, we could just say to you guys, like California, we're gonna go after you just like the feds, and if you don't fix your system, they will. You got to stop prosecuting for drugs, prosecuting for illegal gun possession, prosecuting for money laundering, that kind of thing. Anything that's a victimless crime that they can no longer prosecute. They'll still prosecute for victim crimes, but that will be later.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just starting to think, like, could you even get like just like different ways to stop, like just like you're saying, state courts. Like, could a state come together and be like, well, we don't like this law, so anything that's being prosecuted on this thing, well, that's going to be a trial now. And so, like, it could hold that up to where they change that law to where it's like even just bullet points a specific thing for that state. It's yeah, I mean, it could definitely, I don't know, it's just like one of those things where when crypto comes together and like people come together to change things like this, you could start to see the political effects come into play, and it's going to be interesting times ahead, man. I think this is an interesting idea.
Yeah, to give you an idea of what the actual monetary benefit would be, I estimated $12 million a year cost, and a savings to the federal government of roughly $18 billion a year. So for every dollar spent in this project, the federal government would save $1,500. Now, it's not a savings that the federal government wants to save. They'll be as unhappy as they could possibly be. But for people who are in a higher tax bracket, it would be a way of thinking, well, force the federal government to save $18 million well, basically show them up. This could be considered, by the way, a kind of denial of access system. The term denial of access is commonly used in the computer area. A lot of sites are being attacked by bots that send out lots of requests. Okay, this is a denial of service attack, but it's not so much in the computer arena, it's in the physical arena. It's like if everybody agrees that we're going to ask for a jury trial, and they can only put on, say, 3,500 jury trials a year, then the ones that demand a trial, most of them will have to be released. So again, I think that the number of prosecutions will go way, way down quite quickly. In fact, that will be part of the operation to monitor that. The number of new defendants will be, perhaps we'll know on a daily basis how many new defendants there are. And I expect within a month or two, they will know that their ability to prosecute will have dropped drastically. And we will see that because they will simply stop indicting the large number of people they currently do.
One of the things I was thinking about is that because the system isn't incentivized to prosecute crimes against people, they're really more incentivized just to extract wealth. It seems like if we did this, we would end up with they would actually even more drastically cut back on prosecuting actual crimes. So like right now, I think in New York, the budget for the homicide department is something like, it's either $1 a year or $1 a month per person. It's just like abysmal, right? It's not CSI Miami when you kill somebody. It's a couple of jackasses running around with shitty equipment. But on the other hand, if you try to move a load of cocaine through New York City, it is like CSI Miami. You got helicopters and dogs and SWAT teams focused on you. So that would be one of my sort of concerns, is that that it wouldn't that all it would do is just take funding away from things they don't care about, which are the victim crimes.
Well, that's important, because if somebody's typical statist type people would say something like that, say, "Oh my God, all these people would be released." Well, if 75% of the federal system is to prosecute victimless crimes, then that means there's probably a lot of victim crimes that are not being prosecuted, because why? They're putting 75% of the people away for victimless crimes. If you really want to be safe, you would eliminate victimless crime prosecution, and you would focus only on true victim crimes. And that's an argument that could be used to all these people who are concerned about that. Do they like the fact that so many people are going to be released or already, or not ever prosecuted, because why? They're putting too many victim crime or victimless crime people in prison?
Yeah, I mean, that's part, it's part of the genius, I think, of this whole structure is like, I cannot think of a rational person that would demand somebody who was doing cocaine be prosecuted ahead of somebody who committed murder. And like, it's going to the most base level of just human reaction to things and finding that alignment of incentives using economics. Like, in that regard, I really do think this idea of yours is quite brilliant.
Yeah, you might see. I don't know. I mean, like, I'm just thinking the same vein there. It's like these guys are, doing all this work towards a victimless crime. And yeah, I mean, there might be some guys there in the system themselves where they realize what's going on here, and maybe they'd like to focus on real victim crimes. And yeah, maybe they would even be participating in the system, just even from that side, because yeah, it's something where if we can have real victims in the courts instead of victims' crimes, that'd be good. That'd be nice.
Yeah, and I think that even if the goal of creating this project isn't successful, which is, for some people might be to paralyze the federal government to the point where it can't really function anymore, even if that's not your goal, I think that what could really be achieved with this project, probably at any level, is that you're educating more people about how our justice system actually works. And most of them will probably be surprised about how it works. Like, most people would probably not know that most crimes that are being prosecuted are victimless crimes. And it makes them reconsider, the incentives of the justice system, what crimes are being prioritized, and, why prisons are so full of people that haven't really done anything to hurt people. And so it questions like the ethics of the whole system. And I think that's kind of an educational thing that can be achieved, like whatever success level this gets to, that you're teaching people how, and you're having you're also forcing them to, or not forcing them, but you're force is not the correct word. You're encouraging, stimulating them to participate in the justice system in a way that that most likely will reduce crime, because if you incentivize them to go after people who are actually violent, then the net benefit is that people will be safer. And it'll also make them, actually, because the reason a lot of this happens is because people are so ignorant, they don't pay attention to what the government is doing, and the state benefits from ignorance. Like, that's why they have this thing, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Well, they enjoy people being ignorant of the law. Like, that's how they're able to commit all of these atrocities around the world, is people, they like that their citizenry is ignorant about it. So I think the educational aspect of this would probably be the biggest benefit. Like, if part of the project is actually informing people how many victimless crimes are prosecuted and people are put in jail for that, I think that would be a big benefit.
Well, currently, as I mentioned, drugs, money laundering, illegal entry, illegal guns is the vast majority of the victimless crimes prosecuted. Uh, I I happen to have a degree in chemistry, and some people worry about they wonder if drug crimes are victim crimes anyway. But I'd point out that most of the danger of any existing illegal drug is you don't know what kind of purity it is, the dosage is. You have no idea. It's a lot of harm. When you hear about overdoses, you don't hear about overdoses usually for things like aspirin or ibuprofen or acetaminophen or something. Why? Because they're in little pills that are in nice bottles that you buy in your pharmacy. There would not be a problem of things like that to the near extent if it was all legal. In addition, we are currently limited pharmaceutically, you might say, to drugs that have been around for decades, well, not just decades, centuries, that are dangerous. But what if you said to the pharmaceutical companies, hey, go ahead and invent entertaining pharmaceuticals that don't happen to be dangerous? If they're not, ideally, they wouldn't be addictive. They would be like all the current drugs, except the negative aspects will be taken out. Well, that's something that they can't do. A pharmaceutical company knows if they build a fun drug with no negatives, it'll still be made illegal, just as an automatic knee-jerk reaction. So one of the big benefits of the legalization or the de facto legalization is that they'll replace drugs like heroin or like methamphetamine with something that people want to use but do not have the numerous chemical problems currently associated with it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say, like, yeah, that, the victimless crime and drugs thing. I don't know. That's like where, yeah, nowadays, I don't know. I've been hearing a lot about that fentanyl just sort of showing up in people's whatever they're buying, like the heroin, and to where like a drug dealer just wants to get rid of somebody, they just put a little of that extra fentanyl in there, and it's like it's just such an epidemic right now to where, yeah, hopefully they could focus on stuff like that where it really matters. I mean, like, there is some real, it's just so spread out to where it's just like, yeah, there's some real problems going on there where people are just like sort of stuck in this addictive state, and then they're relying on these people to, like you're saying, just like the purity. How is it? Well, how are they feel about you? Because, like, I mean, maybe they don't feel so good about you today, and they'll throw some extra fentanyl in there, and
yeah,
it's a pretty awful situation going on here in the U.S. with all that.
Yeah, that's a big argument for legalization, or at least decriminalization. Put it in a position where instead of you're being dependent on a dozen people upstream, so to speak, that you don't even know, have a system where you could walk into your local pharmacy and buy something that you want to buy. I happen to live in Washington State, one of the first couple of states that legalized marijuana. Now we've been followed by Oregon and California, and
I think y'all just decriminalized 2 grams of possession of anything, right? Where it's like y'all decriminalized the possession of anything up to 2 grams.
No. It applies to marijuana specifically, at least in Washington. It's typically 1 ounce you can have. Now, the one odd thing about that Washington law is that there is no such thing as legal home grow in Washington. The people who wrote the laws to put it on the ballot in Washington were sorry, but they were fools. They gave away way too much to the government. And initially they gave like 25% cumulative tax percentages off of the government, which I think were subsequently dropped by a factor of 2. So the federal or the state government gets like 37% tax compared to the current sales tax of like 8.5% in Washington. Myself, I could only justify well, even if I were to ignore being a libertarian, I would only want to justify sales tax. If they want to tax marijuana at 8.5% tax, fine. They'll, but right now it's like 37%. And by the way, they also put in a lot of restrictions on who may grow, resulting it keeps the price high. In my personal opinion, if marijuana costs more than about $50 an ounce, it's overpriced.
Yeah, I was just looking up. That's it looks like there is one county in Washington near Seattle that's experimenting with this decriminalization of any drug. Snohomish County, just north of Seattle. Yeah, it's home to nearly 800,000 folks, and apparently they're going to try this where they're not going to prosecute a possession of any drug up to 2 grams. So that's just from March 1st of this year. So it looks like they're going to at least start experimenting there in that state. So hopefully that's a positive sign. The people around you are in same sort of they want this sort of thing to happen too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, from a recreational point of view, at least, it's the whole medical application of marijuana is a whole rabbit hole. But like, personally, I think regardless of how dangerous or detrimental a drug is to yourself, I mean, that's your choice to make. I mean, we don't stop people from going skydiving because it's dangerous and it could kill you if you don't take proper precautions. Like, people do what they want with their own body to seek enjoyment in life. And it's tragic when things go wrong, when people die of an overdose. But at the end of the day, if somebody isn't getting high and rampaging through the streets, hurting other people or destroying other people's property, I mean, that's an individual's choice to make. And it's the consequences for them to mitigate as an individual.
And I mean, sometimes it's the best option. I mean, as a veteran, that's coming from the Gulf Coast, I'll tell you, man, like, I was stuck in a place where they were giving me heavy seizure meds and it put me in a real bad spot. And I mean, like, the thing that helped me was illegal. And I mean, like, I had to get out of there. I moved up to Colorado, and like, I mean, like, now I'm able to treat my problems with something that I think is helpful that the government down there doesn't necessarily agree with. And I mean, like, it is one of those things where the current construct is causing a lot more problems than just like the veterans. I feel sorry for those guys that are living in a state still where they don't have access to it. And still, it's amazing to me coming to Colorado and the older guys, there's still a stigma attached to it where they don't want to touch it. It's just like, man, stuff is super helpful, but it's something where people have the right to choose what they think is helpful for them. And, because a lot of times that system that's in place is one size fits all, and that definitely doesn't work.
Sorry, Jim. I was just going to say, I definitely am a fan of this idea too. I think just to be totally transparent, I hate to put you on the spot too much, but my main pushback on something like this at this point in history is just that if we spend $100,000 on this, that's $100,000 that's not invested in Bitcoin right now. And really, assassination politics is, dependent on this, but even just any kind of rational, reasonable justice system, I think the only way to break through that monopoly is going to be to first have a secure currency. And so it's hard for me to personally want to put any of my blood, sweat, and tears into this when Bitcoin is it's working, it's there, it's functional. And it seems like it's the linchpin to everything coming together. So,
okay, I don't object to that concept. Keep in mind, Bitcoin, where there are these days, I think, at least hundreds of other much lesser known crypto coins, and I'm not looking, you might say, for donations from a small number of people, except ultimately, the main thing I'm trying to do is to get contact with people, well, possibly of the billionaire range, the people who really want to shut down the government. They want to have an effect. They have all that money, but what can they do with that money? What can they turn it into an actual effect with no blowback to them? If There's a guy named Charlie Shrem. He's one of the, I think, the Bitcoin billionaires. A few years back, 3 or 4 years ago, he was charged going to Europe. He was charged with money laundering for something having to do with some of the dark market there, supplying cryptocurrency. I don't know much of the details, but a person like that might want powerful payback, and shutting down the entire system would do that for a person like that. There are, Peter Thiel is a libertarian billionaire. As I said, George Soros, he's causing trouble almost all the time. I would think he'd like to be able to grab the the gonads of the system and squeeze really hard. And this is a mechanism. I'm basically looking for people who want to shut down the system and to do it without risk to them personally.
Right.
And I think if this project cost, instead of $10 million a year, cost $10 billion a year, it would still be fundable. Yes. But it's only 10, 12 million dollars a year.
Yeah, that's actually, I mean, it's a good point. I think there's a lot of people out there that have a lot of money, and I would be fine if they put 95% or 99% of their money into Bitcoin and then threw 1% at shutting down all these illegal prosecutions. So I like it. Just relatively speaking, I think investing in Bitcoin is going to be a bigger bang for our buck. But I do think that, there's so many projects out there, and almost all of them are laughable, but this actually does make some sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, JW, it depends on whether you're more concerned with the amount of money going into Bitcoin or the number of people adopting Bitcoin. If you're saving a bunch of people from potentially being imprisoned, that's a bunch of people who you could possibly educate along the way about Bitcoin, and who would probably be more likely to use Bitcoin, because if they're in a position where they're being prosecuted for a victimless crime, they're likely someone who could benefit from using Bitcoin.
That's an interesting point. I definitely would not have thought of that on my own. That's I'll have to kick that around for a bit.
I'd like to tell my recent Bitcoin story. I'm probably responsible for a lot of the volatility of Bitcoin in the last 4 months. Let me tell you the story. Back in November 7th, I was in the Parallel Polis convention in Prague, and I announced the Jim Bell project to publicize my assassination politics essay. You might say to republicize it. And I mentioned Bitcoin rather heavily. Well, even the next day, the people who put on the convention noticed a blip that occurred. It was, if you want to look it up, November 7th, I think, 7 p.m. Prague time. Well, within 6 days, the price of Bitcoin had gone from about $4,300 to $6,800. And not only that, within the next month, the price of Bitcoin, I think, had gone up to about 18,000. I think I can realistically take credit for a lot of that. It was certainly the thing that occurred within the 6 days. Now, people don't know this because I happen to be dealing with a crooked publicity agent called CoinPoint in Australia and Bulgaria, who took my $1,000, and I think when they found out what I was trying to do, refused to send out a press release to about 50 different organizations. And that's still a problem right now. If they're reading this, they better get themselves straight. In any case, I can't claim responsibility for the crash in price after it got up to 18,000. I mean, you might say I kicked it up, but after that, whatever comes up.
Well, after this interview, I think it's gonna drop for sure.
Yeah. Well, let me point out that Zero Cash or Zero Coin, one of those anonymous currencies, is the future, I think, of anonymous donations. Bitcoin is great. Bitcoin was an amazing tour de force, an invention. But if you're really looking for anonymity, you really have to have one of these anonymous coins.
You know, that's interesting that you say that, because I was looking at your website and you've got, you've got stuff like Bitcoin Cash and other things that that claim certain features. I think one of the things that's been really interesting to me over the last, I don't know, 6 months is just seeing how many people that are sort of old cypherpunks or libertarian type folks are getting deceived on the technology side into moving away from Bitcoin, and how many people on the sort of technology side, you know, guys like Dan Kaminsky that did the original security review, are deceived based on the economics away from Bitcoin. So it does feel like there's a very concerted effort to trick people away from Bitcoin. But as somebody that feels like he has a good grasp on economics and the security of Bitcoin, there really isn't a good reason to use any of those things. It's all fraud, and we should chat more offline. But I think you've been a little suckered on that, and it's kind of unfortunate, and it adds another level of complexity. Like, for example, with trying to free Ross and the Free Ross campaign, and a lot of libertarian organizations, they've come out in support of Bitcoin Cash, or at least said they're accepting it, and that's because this really shady character Roger Ver is running around and tricking people into basically endorsing an attack on Bitcoin. It doesn't have anything to offer other than to slow Bitcoin adoption, which means we're all just going to be slaves that much longer. So that's a whole nother can of worms that we should dig into at some point. But really, let's see, we probably should switch over to the news stories here pretty quick, or this is going to be a 4-hour show. But that was great, Jim. I really appreciate you being on, man. Always really thought-provoking concepts and stuff, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, the idea is amazing. I really appreciate you sharing it with us. It's an interesting discussion for sure to continue on.
I'll be happy to stick around.
And I'm actually I was about to say, I'm really looking forward to kind of your input on some of these stories today, because a good number of them actually have to deal with regulations and attempts for market entities to kind of regulate themselves. So it'd be kind of nice to hear your 2 cents on that.
Okay. I may walk away for a moment to get some more water to drink, but after that, I'll be right back.
Yeah, that's fine.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I guess let's just dive into the first story. All
right.
I think everybody who watches regularly should remember us shit-talking Coinbase regarding pretty much sweeping coins sent to merchants, using them as a merchant processor and not crediting them to the proper account. I'm not 100% positive, but I am pretty certain at this point that this tweet that Buttcoin made is actually referring to that same bug. And they have not updated BIP70 payment protocol to take into account SegWit addresses. So here is, I hate to say it, once again, for what seems like something that happens every week, Coinbase is just completely failing to actually integrate new upgrades into their system correctly. And it's actually losing people money. So...
Yeah, I mean, when we did that BitPay story last week about a similar thing, and it was like the Cash App said that they had implemented SegWit addresses. Or was it the Cash App? I think so. Or no, it was Bitfinex said that they had implemented SegWit, standard addresses, and then all of a sudden Coinbase came right after that, and it seemed like a rushed press release just to sort of stay relevant or something. And yeah, when the BitPay BIP70 news came out about that, it's like I was just wondering the exact same thing about Coinbase, and it's not that much of a surprise to see that's the way they handle things. Come on, Coinbase.
Mm-hmm. Just in case you're not really aware of Coinbase, Jim, they're pretty much one of the biggest Bitcoin exchanges in the ecosystem, and they also offer merchant services for businesses to accept Bitcoin, and they have a long history of pretty much just fucking up everything you could imagine is possible to fuck up in how they build their system.
I am a little bit familiar with Coinbase. A number of my input accounts go into a Coinbase system. but it took a week or two to get the thing started. Very unpleasant. Now I can't compare it to anybody else because I've never used anybody else. And the reason that I limited, well, most of my coins to a certain ones is simply because those are what Coinbase supports. I didn't initially do any actual privacy coins simply because I needed to find what amounts to a bank that supports privacy coins. Like I said, the Zcash or Zero Cash, I need to find a good bank for them. What can I say? I consider this, digital cash teething pains. I'm not strongly in favor or strongly against any particular digital cash. I think we need, you might say, a number of options. The world needs a lot of options because, well, this is not a long time thing. We haven't had digital cash for more than, 8 or 9 years now. And it's amazing that Bitcoin did as well as it did, developed by basically one person or maybe a small number of people. So I'd say go, guys. Do what you need to do. Get your systems working. Coinbase, fix your system. But it's all going to work out in the end, I think.
Well, I mean, to kind of offer like a flip side, I guess, of your take on things. I mean, from my point of view, when you're trying to establish something like a digital cash, I mean, there's really one property, I think, that makes it valuable, and that's the fact that it functions with nobody controlling it. And if, for instance, if you look at Bitcoin, historically, all the attempts to change things or push development in a particular direction, if the user base and the people who actually own it didn't agree with that, it's pretty much failed consistently every time. Whereas if you look at a lot of the alternative coins out there, it's very easy with the small concentrated user bases they have and kind of people providing infrastructure to kind of just arbitrarily change things. And from a technical standpoint, most of the technologies that are being tested in alternative digital cash are pretty much things that were developed for Bitcoin or by Bitcoin developers. And you don't really see that reciprocally in the other direction. Like a lot of these alternative currencies are implementing things designed for Bitcoin, but we've never seen anything that was pretty much created from scratch or originally in an alternative project that's ever been integrated into Bitcoin. And I think that kind of shows in a more concrete way that really what a lot of these currencies are doing are kind of just grabbing things developed for Bitcoin that aren't finished yet or haven't had all of the flaws ironed out of them. And they're just spinning up new currencies using them instead of actually trying to test or implement new original ideas.
Well, I think of digital cash as being where the American automotive system was in about 1910. They didn't expect the standardization back then that they expect today. It's going to take time. It'll take another 5 to 10 years to really nail down these problems, and they will have to get nailed down.
Yeah, something where, did you mention that NoPara said he was going to bring fungibility to Bitcoin? I know that's something he wanted us to say. So I mean, yeah, it's something where I think eventually these sort of aspects will come to Bitcoin again, where people will feel confident that they're there.
I mean, there are a lot of developers working on privacy solutions for Bitcoin, and that technology particularly, pretty much every privacy coin out there is using something that was built by Bitcoin developers for Bitcoin. For instance, Zcash, the zero knowledge or ZK snarks that they use, was actually originally developed as a proposal for Bitcoin. And kind of the reason it's not implemented yet is the cryptography and the math behind it is brand new. So we haven't really had it out there being battle tested long enough to be relatively sure that there are no fundamental flaws in the cryptography involved. And then even Monero, the technology it uses, confidential transactions, was actually something developed by Greg Maxwell, one of the I would say most talented Bitcoin developers. And so, like, specifically with privacy, they're kind of just picking at things that haven't really met that bar of we are sure enough that this is solid that we can start building global financial infrastructure on it.
Yeah, just to repeat that in a different way, they're all scams. They're all taking technology that's been developed in Bitcoin that's not really ready for production. It's not really even ready for beta. And then they're pretending it's real. So if you go out and you buy Zcoin or Zcash on an exchange and then use it, you're not going to be any more secure. You're going to be a far less secure than if you went out and you bought Bitcoin on local Bitcoins for cash and then used that. And we're going to continue to improve the sort of on-chain experience. There's a lot of work going on with confidential transactions, which are not really ready yet. And that's why you'll only find them in a scam coin called Monero. But they will be ready. And when they are, they'll be on Bitcoin.
Well, to kind of take a middle ground on this, I mean, one of the reasons I don't like Zcash isn't really whether it actually fulfills the goal of being an anonymous cryptocurrency. It's more to do with the fact that the people who run it do not actually seem to have a strong dedication to privacy. Like, the thing that always stood out to me was how Zuko has said that he wanted to make Zcash 2 not anonymous enough for criminals, but anonymous for everyone else. And it's like, that's impossible to implement. How the hell would you ever do that? Sorry to trigger you, JW, but I like Monero because Monero actually does have that dedication at least, and it for the most, because the thing that stood out to me is when I can't remember his name, but he was the guy that was living in Thailand and he ran one of the darknet markets, and when the police raided his home, they could tell that he had Monero and Zcash, but they couldn't figure out how much Monero he had, but they could tell how much Zcash he had, which I always thought was interesting because Zcash is always touted, like as Zuko said at CCC, the last CCC in December 2017, he was saying that Zcash was better than Monero. But that's an interesting, use or a real world example of, Monero maybe having a lot of benefit. So
all right, I'll be really brief because I could go on for hours, obviously. But no, Monero is not as stupid as Zcash. I agree.
All right, good job.
But I mean, I feel this is going to be a long
stupid,
show, guys.
All of them are more stupid.
We've got to get into Monero in a little bit more. Where we're gonna expand on all this.
But trademark jarring Shinobi segue out of nowhere. Despite the fact they continue fucking up in every way possible, Coinbase has received an e-money license from the Financial Conduct Authority in the United Kingdom. And this, I'm not really sure what to kind of take away from this, because this isn't a traditional banking license. This is actually a license created in the European Union specifically for non-bank entities to process payments. And in the way the article kind of frames it, the Coinbase spokesman is specifically clarified that there is a distinction between e-money and cryptocurrencies. And as you know, Coinbase's main business model is more of a broker to buy and sell cryptocurrencies rather than, it's kind of like a PayPal, which is what they kind of originally were trying to do with the business. Like, I'm not so sure if they're just attempting to expand their brokerage services into the United Kingdom, or if they're kind of trying to go back to that original business model as like a PayPal or an entity that would actually process payments. And the way that they applied for this license, I'm not really sure if that's actually what they're trying to do, but if it was, I'm not really sure how they would try to accomplish this, because e-money, like the structure of this license is effectively, you put money in an account somewhere, and then like PayPal, like you have transfers over a second system. Like you're not actually directly using the bank, you're pretty much using IOUs. And so I'm kind of curious, like what are they trying to do here? Are they just expanding their traditional services into the UK, or actually trying to become a sort of centralized payment processor for payments denominated in fiat or cryptocurrencies and etc.?
I don't know. I mean, like, yeah, I was looking at it too, and I don't really know what to exactly to take away from it, because it talks about how they're also trying to put together this faster payment scheme, to provide these efficient bank transfers, and like in the like in the rest of these stories all about regulation, we know that the central banking guys of the Fed, like the IMF, they want to somehow regulate these things and somehow figure out a way to fight fire with fire, is what we're going to talk about in this opening article. And it's just like, maybe this is sort of like steps towards that, to try and build a system that, is not exactly Bitcoin, but something to where it's something that the citizenry can use for banking, that is cryptocurrencies. And I don't know. We just know that they're doing all this stuff with their special drawing right, and lots of different nation states trying to form their own cryptos. And it's just like, maybe it's a different method. It's like we're saying, we don't really exactly know what to take away from this. But I mean, I don't know. The UK is pretty big when it comes to all this central banking and everything. And I think that maybe that's what they're doing over there. Maybe they're trying to figure out a way to fight fire with fire, quote unquote.
Well, yeah, because I've said this multiple times before, but if people want to use some kind of custodial system in order to transact in Bitcoin, like not necessarily as a sole means of holding it, I mean that's really the choice of an individual. And people out there who kind of scream like, you're not using Bitcoin if you use it that way. Well, I mean, if you want to argue semantics, I mean, yeah, you aren't. You're using a custodial system, a centralized system, instead of directly managing it yourself. But at the end of the day, that's not your choice to make, because the entire idea of this, in my mind, is sovereignty of money. And if somebody of their own free will wants to engage in a relationship with a centralized entity to do something like process payments more efficiently, I mean, frankly, that's none of your business. But I just think it would be kind of interesting to see Coinbase dive into that and actually try to directly market their services as that, because historically, like especially over the last year or two, they've kind of constantly reiterated, like, we're not a wallet. Like, you shouldn't count on us to store your coins. Like, that's not what our business is for. And especially just like in the United Kingdom, like that really kind of spins my head around, because payment processing in the UK is probably the best in the world. I mean, like, it's touchless payment is pretty widely integrated. And I mean, even direct bank to bank transfers will clear in less than a day, I believe. So it's like, if they are kind of trying to branch off in that direction, they're doing it in the one place where legacy systems will actually be able to kind of offer them like strict competition.
Yeah, it's certainly one of those things where, I don't know, I think that a lot of people do choose that custodial service because it's a lot easier. And, we know they did make like that. They recently made that Vault wallet, and they have the USD wallet. And I mean, like, there's you know, different aspects to that platform where I think it is easier for people to, you know, get things around. And I mean, I don't know. It's just like, I feel like that's definitely a way where if it's like, how are you going to control Bitcoin? It's like, that's really impossible. But maybe if you can sort of control that on ramp and people's comfortability with the system, then maybe that's where you can affect change within that system. It's the only way I'm thinking like it could be related that way.
Well, the nice thing about all these things is that hackers will come by and correct the flaws, right? The black hats will, they're not all going away, and we haven't seen the last exchange hack. So we can count on those guys to do their jobs.
Like, I don't know, like, what are your thoughts, Jim, on like custodial or more centralized financial institutions versus using a cryptocurrency purely in a peer-to-peer way?
Well, unfortunately, I can't claim to be even close to being an expert in such things. I obviously didn't invent the concept of crypto coins. That was probably done by a guy named David Chaum, who eventually had an article written in the August 92 issue of Scientific American. But having heard that, having read that, I went on to propose a system, assassination politics, that had as its a very important feature or the use of a digital currency. Ideally, of course, and a sufficiently anonymous digital currency so that people felt comfortable donating to a system that they didn't want anybody else to be able to learn about. How, in the end, people deal with money, and I use the term money in general. I realize that people distinguish currency and money, but you know, it used to be there wasn't such a thing as paper money, or it was very unreliable and whatever. You keep a few dollars in your physical wallet in your pocket. You keep a lot more money in a bank account and so forth. Again, the system adjusts to supply your need. Ultimately, they invented credit cards, and that did part of the task then and there. I think there is a need. I know some people are down on that, but there's a need for privacy coin just as a temporary way of making donations that cannot be traced. Now, you may only put money into a privacy coin for a few seconds or a few minutes or an hour or two. You buy it with some other coin you happen to have, or even possibly physical dollars that you happen to have, you know, like, you know, FRNs, Federal Reserve notes. But again, a temporary shield, using a privacy coin for a few seconds or minutes or hours as a shield so that nobody can figure out who donated $10 million to the federal justice shutdown system is I think necessary. You know, you may not want to keep your money for more than the few seconds or minutes that you do the transfer, but I think most people would agree that you need some kind of, for big donations, you'd like to be able to provide people with a reasonable assurance that nobody's going to be able to find out they made the donation that they did.
So your concern is mostly just the privacy itself, and not whether it's achieved through a distributed means or a centralized means. Just that the privacy is there.
Yeah, basically that's it. Now, there might be there may already be this. I haven't seen one physically. What amounts to like a Coke machine, where you walk up, you put in $50 or $100 or $200, you press where you want it to go, and it'll do it. Well, that's one way of, not entirely with a guarantee of privacy. I mean, somebody could put a hidden camera in there or something, but there needs to be a mechanism to allow ordinary people to shift various forms of their wealth and send it to where they want it to go with a reasonable probability of privacy and anonymity. It is unfortunate. Well, in my mind, it's somewhat unfortunate that Bitcoin wasn't initially entirely anonymous. But on the other hand, what's the old saying? If an elephant can dance, the amazing thing is he can dance, not that he does it very well. The person who invented Bitcoin was clearly an utter genius. That his product did not do each and everything that we want a coin to do, I'm willing to forgive him for. I mean, how in the world? Well, I've never liked software. I don't like running, computers are irritating. I love microprocessors, gates, flops, op amps, electronics. But this guy was obviously a genius. He put together something that has held up pretty damn well. And the fact that it doesn't have what I consider perfect anonymity, well, it's still a great thing. It's still the premier digital currency. And I think it's going to be around for a while. What can I say? I would be feeling rather greedy if I objected to the first big attempt at digital cash merely because of a little flaw, like it doesn't run my AP system quite like I intended it to. What can I say? I think, however, I've been told in private, not really secret or anything, but just in private, he said, people have said that they think that my AP essay induced, could very easily have induced Satoshi to work on the concept of digital cash. It actually provided, between the years of 1995 and 2009, it provided a rhetorical and concept that people looked at and said, hey, that might be an interesting thing to have. What do we need for that? Well, as I pointed out, it required good encryption, and PGP was an example of good encryption. It required good, anonymous networking, and Tor turned into the anonymous networking, and it required some kind of digital cash. And lo and behold, along came Bitcoin in 2009. I think I can take a certain amount of credit for having induced these. Not that I'm saying that they wouldn't have happened without my suggestion. These are the kinds of things that were always going to happen. But I provided a way of telling people that this is important. Look to the future, and this is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of fortuitous the way that or David Chalm's original paper is kind of what set the gears churning, because I like to rant, and I'm going to do so now. I actually think that idea in itself is probably one of the more promising, at least from a technical standpoint, ways to really give Bitcoin the transactional scale that it needs to really service the entire globe. And his original idea was effectively just the bank is just minting the money, and there's no real underlying thing other than the promise of dollars, which are also just kind of printed out of nowhere. And I think if you take something like Chalm's original idea and you combine it with something like Bitcoin, so that notes that are being issued by the server are directly one-to-one back to Bitcoin, then you not only give it the kind of transactional scale that it's lacking, but you also create little black boxes of pretty much total privacy. The Bitcoin goes in, it moves wherever it's going to move, and then eventually it comes out. And as far as privacy is concerned, all you see is it moving in and moving out. And even the operator themselves have no notion of who is transacting with who in the interim.
I'd like to remind people of something. There was an essay written in 1987 by a guy named Chuck Hamill called From Crossbows to Cryptography. where he advocated using what was then a very new concept, public key encryption, and implementing it on personal computers of that era. Well, oddly enough, within 2 or 3 years, along had come PGP, written by Phil Zimmerman. I actually referenced this particular essay. It was otherwise called the Libertech Project. I referenced that, I think, in part 1 of my assassination politics essay. I think it's important to look at this as a chain of, well, essay and then result, because there are people who have ideas and there are people who go to the trouble of implementing those ideas. Chuck Hamill had this idea that he jokingly said as part of his essay. He said, well, the liberal position is we ought to sell computers to Russia. The conservative position is we shouldn't. And he said, not maybe half jokingly, the libertarian position is we should buy computers and airdrop them over Russia to force them to have them, because he said that if nothing else, a computer is a marvelously productive copy machine. Back in that era, copy machines in Russia were well controlled. Back then, however, you could copy 1.44 megabytes, which at some point was actually seen to be a lot of data, onto a floppy disk. So you see, Chuck Hamill had an idea, and probably 2 to 3 years later, Phil Zimmerman turned it into PGP. I, of course, had my AP idea, and then it became Tor, and then it became Bitcoin, and then this kind of. Now, let me say, I'm about as far as it's possible to be somebody who could actually implement a Bitcoin. My name was actually put on as a one of maybe 100 alternative possible people responsible for Bitcoin. Well, sorry, I hate software, and I was in prison through that time before 2000 or 2010. So the chances of me being the implementer of Bitcoin is pretty damn low. But there are people who have ideas, and there are people who will all go off and implement those ideas, and we should pay more attention to this chain of rhetorical causation. I'll put it that way. Somebody has an idea, somebody implements the idea. I jokingly say to people that I had the second most famous internet essay behind that of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. And of course, he punctuated his essay with explosions, so that's probably why he got more publicity than I did.
Yeah, it's always interesting, but JW said something a while back saying Bitcoin is a mission, and I believe that. It's like it's not just a coin, and it's an ever evolving thing. It's existed before Bitcoin. It's something that we just keep moving forward, and these this anonymity parts of Bitcoin, like you're saying, it's something where we get through what we get, and we can't say you didn't tap dance right to the elephant and such. So I think, but that technology and those implementations and those ideas, they are being run with right now, and they are going to make their way back to Bitcoin. And it's going to, I know we'll eventually have some things to where these custodial services, like I know they're a lot easier to deal with when you're working with software. It's real hard to play the actual custodian of your Bitcoin. And so hopefully all that stuff will start making its way back, and if Bitcoin's going to keep evolving, it keeps moving forward. It doesn't stay in a present state, and that's it. It's an amazing space to be.
If Bitcoin is a chain of blocks, like conceptually, it's a chain of ideas that started a long time ago and is going to keep being extended for a long time to come. All right, though. I'm going to do another jarring segue out of nowhere and try to drop a couple stories at once because they are all thematically connected. So, First off, Christine Lagarde from the IMF seems to be changing her tune a little bit. I mean, she's always kind of spoken about the potential downsides of things like Bitcoin, but mostly been speaking about the kind of good that they can do for the economy as a new asset class or enabler of new modes of economic interaction. And now, I mean, you know, this I think, I mean, I don't know if I can agree with you about the price effect of your recent kind of repopularizing the concept of assassination markets, but I could very much see that having an effect on how a regulator like Christine changes her tune, because she's pretty much talking now about kind of taking blockchain and using it as a way to speed up and streamline sharing regulatory information between different bodies and jurisdictions to kind of deal with the potential of things like money laundering or the big boogeyman of terrorist financing that could be enabled through things like Bitcoin. And this kind of comes on the tails of Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, also kind of starting to take a negative tune on things and speaking of the need for regulation and kind of reining in the space. Although on Mark's part, he wants to try and kind of push things, and he's presenting a report at the G20 meeting in Argentina. But even he is kind of saying it's unlikely to kind of get international cooperation as far as a regulatory framework anytime soon. And the next one is also Japan kind of pushing for the same thing. They're also urging G20 to try to discuss and introduce some kind of unified regulatory framework for cryptocurrencies globally. And this is kind of following the establishment of a self-regulatory organization in Japan amongst all the major exchanges, trying to kind of set out some common sense rules or policies before the government steps in and just starts breaking things without understanding them. And I guess the last one in this rapid fire chunk is shortly after the CFTC was effectively pleading with American businesses to kind of take to Japan's example and try to establish some kind of self-regulatory body, the Winklevi twins exchange Gemini is founding, I believe it's the Virtual Commodities Association, to attempt to do just that. And they've actually, I really suggest everybody like actually go through and read this. I'm not really gonna have the time to do it for you here, but they are setting out kind of a mission statement of purpose, kind of a proposal for a formalized membership requirements and a governance structure, and a basic stab at kind of what they're expecting of any members of this body. You know, transparency, dealing with conflicts of interest regarding informational asymmetry with material information, and kind of standardized rules for how the markets are actually governed so that things can kind of smoothly function as a singular marketplace. And I do not think this is going to be even close to the last wave of regulatory proposals and attempts over the next year.
Yeah, looking at this story of the Gemini one, and it looks like, yeah, they were taking they were listening to that CFTC discussion, talking about how like the space or that article talking about how they hope that this space will step up and sort of police itself. And like we said last week, Japan, all those exchanges came together and started coming up with their own sort of rules. And Gemini's based in New York, and the New York license guys, they were talking about redoing that because that whole license sort of was a one-size-fits-all approach that doesn't look very smart in this day. So it is kind of interesting. It's all kind of coming together at that point in time where maybe they're trying to at least put together some proper, regulation for that next New York license whenever they do decide to redo it. And yeah, the Bank of England, the IMF, and the G20 coming together to try and fight fire with fire again. Maybe doing that through custodial ways or something else like that. Just yeah, it's just like, this is regulation coming to the crypto space. It's going to be one of those things where, I don't know, like, I really think the idea of us sort of self-policing and coming together with the rules is probably the best way to go.
Yeah, to comment on the first article about the IMF's comments, so when I was at the Blackstack conference, Jutta Steiner from Parity actually mentioned a use case for blockchains for sharing regulatory, or like a regulatory data sharing network for government entities. And when I heard that, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. They're never going to do that. That's such a bad idea. Like, why do you need a blockchain for that? You don't need a blockchain for that. So to hear them actually saying like, oh, we're going to use a blockchain to share data, it's like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. They're actually doing that. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, it really is silly. Like for the purpose of like moving large amounts of information like that, I mean, a blockchain is just adding friction, like not removing it. Like what you need there is just a comprehensive like set of agreements and standards for what to share, when to share. And I mean, nowadays, like the technical ability to do that is effectively make sure your line of communication isn't compromised and then send it. Like a blockchain is just going to slow that down or add more overhead to it.
Yeah, and they haven't considered like, are they going to have some kind of token that comes along with that database? Like, sorry guys, GovCoin is already taken. There was already an ICO that was called GovCoin, so I guess you have to call it something else like IMF Coin.
Yeah, I think that they're gonna have to come up with something better than. I know they said special drawing right the first time, and I keep repeating that. That just doesn't ring off the tongue. They're gonna have to come up with something.
Yeah, the only reason to have a blockchain is to be government resistant, right? To have a government hard network, and the government operating something that's designed to be government hard. We've totally embraced the newspeak and the insanity. 2 + 2 = 5. We're definitely there. But yeah, the other thing that cracks me up about all this regulation stuff, or all the fear about regulation, is because blockchains only make sense when you're trying to create something that's government hard. All the intensification of focus from government on trying to crack down is only going to end up helping the thing that's actually helpful and useful, which is Bitcoin. All the ICOs they're not government hard, and so they're going away. All the altcoins, they're not government hard. Eventually they're going to be going away. So I guess in a way I'm glad for it, even though it's going to, there's going to be some short-term pain if this stuff ramps up. But the whole point from the beginning was to design something that was government hard, and that's just been completely obscured with all the nonsense going on. So maybe at least we'll get some clarity out of it.
Well, from my somewhat unusual perspective, I look at all these developments and I wonder, what is the government, or what are governments in general trying to do to keep themselves in existence? I foresaw that digital cash would ultimately eliminate all governments, certainly government as we know it. They may not have believed it 15, 20 years ago, but the governments, I'm sure, do now realize that their very future existence is in very much doubt. And I would think that they're doing lots of things to try to figure out how to get around what I predicted would occur. I don't think they're going to be successful in the end, but they're not going to go out without a fight, and we're seeing evidence of the fight right now.
I mean, there's a book, The Sovereign Individual by James Dale Davidson and Lord William Rees-Mogg, that I keep bringing up, hoping people who watch will read it. But they have a really good way of kind of breaking down the dynamic, I think, of why things like Bitcoin are kind of going to push the world in that direction. And they have this term, a government ran by employees. And when you kind of take the tacit assumption that the government is what's in control of the monetary supply and the monetary system and taxation and such, the incentives for people within that government are to just like keep justifying it or keep it growing, because that is their source of income and livelihood. And so there's never really going to be a time or place where their incentives will be to downsize it or remove power or shut down part of it, because everybody's livelihood depends on its existence. And so like the taking away their stream of revenue or income is effectively really the only way to combat that, because you will never have people, or at least rational people, who will do something that's against their own self-interest. JW, no more
Sorry, man.
Come on, man. You're being quiet. All the things
I was actually rambling muted there, so that's even better. I was just talking to myself. Actually, you know what it reminds me of is telling everybody that these crap coins are no good. So I could just sit here muted and just keep saying again and again, they're just security flaws. They're just repackaged. So I just had that experience in real life. So I'm sorry, man. Yeah, now I've completely lost my train of thought. So complete fail. Sorry, guys.
Your train of thought has done another Amtrak, huh?
Right. Yeah.
I like that one too. Yeah, good, man.
Hey, Amtrak has a very scenic route across the entire United States. Come on, it's very nice, and the food is actually good.
And it'll be the best ride of your life until the last 15 seconds.
Right.
Until that inferior infrastructure fails.
Let's just put it this way: if you're like dependent on the train arriving on time, you're screwed. If you're dependent, or your preference is to have a nice journey, then you'll be fine. But the train will not run on time.
I hope so.
And it might go headlong into another freight train.
Right. That's what just happened, right?
Like, I mean, we don't even do that daily anymore. So it'll be fine. You can trust the government with your transportation needs in the United States for sure.
I happen to live in the state of Washington. They've had 2 or maybe 3 major accidents in the last few months or so. There was that one case where they had the inaugural run of a train from Seattle down. Ultimately, they wanted to go down to Portland, but they were going 80 miles an hour on a sharp set of turns that required a 30-mile-per-hour maximum, and well, it sort of went off.
That was a high-speed rail test, right? Like, well, that one was?
By European standards, it's not high speed. The main reason it was thought of as high speed was because it avoided a lot of the ordinary original route was a meandering route around the bay, the Puget Sound, and they had straightened the route. Well, fine, they tested it out for a few times, but with the actual inaugural run, they forgot to drop down to 30 miles an hour on this train on this overpass. And needless to say, when you go 2.5 times the safe speed, you're gonna run into problems, and they did.
Yeah, that was one of those things where when I saw that story, it was real upsetting to me, because like I got family in Louisiana and Texas, and those high-speed rail systems would benefit them so greatly. And like when that happened, it's like the ideas of those things being put in place there just like got shut down really quick after that. And it just made me think, God, like, if you're doing this, why not do it right? Like, why do it wrong like that? Unless you want to keep the infrastructure down and you don't want to build it up. I mean, like, because this is like, it was a big story when it came out. It pushed projects down across the nation from that. And it's like, yeah, it was upsetting. But I don't know. Maybe they'll get it right.
I repeatedly, to my own mind, I point out that somebody could write an app for a smartphone, like an Android or something, that would have all the railroad tracks and the rules, maximum speed and such, and they could have a system that literally they could put in their pocket and tell. It wouldn't have to be a huge project. It would be literally self-contained. GPS, it would be based on data that could easily fit into a smartphone. Why don't they do that? And they rely on these complicated systems that require installing it into the track, and I don't know, they can't deal with modern technology. What can I say? They just can't use modern technology
They
to
don't
solve the
understand
problem.
it, that's for sure. They need to get a better understanding of what's going on, because it always seems like if they had a firm grasp on it and they tried to do it right, they could do it, but they never do seem to have that.
They had another accident a few years back, 3 or 4 years ago, in a train coming out of Philadelphia going north, and the fool operator, I guess the engineer or something, that was another case where he was going 80, no, actually more, like 105, or in a zone that you could not possibly go by more than 80, and he did, and the whole thing crashed, and 8 or so people were killed. Again, that's an example where if you literally just had an app on your cell phone and it said, here's where you're supposed to be going no more than 80 miles an hour. Well, why doesn't something like that exist? Why do they depend on individual humans to do the right thing? Another case, maybe a year after that, wasn't there a train that came into a station, and the guy was a sleep apnea sufferer, so I guess he must have gone to sleep, and he hit the end of the terminal at 20 miles an hour and killed one woman. God, these people just don't know how to use modern technology.
Well, it's one of those things where it's like you see these stories keep popping up, and we talk about it like, well, if you would ride Amtrak, we would think about these risks and stuff. And it certainly does keep in mind, well, I'm going to hold onto my vehicle and keep pumping it with gas and just keep going on these standard roads and system, because these things seem to work. Like, those things will just never work. But I mean, we know that we can get it to work. So it's just one of those things that we're dealing with right now. And, in the future, I think like all this, like in more individual freedom towards financing and everything towards these systems will help bring about these systems to actually function.
Yeah.
It'd be nice.
Mm-hmm. So who actually watched the entire House subcommittee hearing? I passed out halfway through it and was just angrily thinking, why do you keep calling Ethereum a cryptocurrency when you lay out the explicit definition of a security as something that collects money for something that doesn't exist, when that is literally how Ethereum was created? They took a bunch of people's money for something that didn't exist yet and didn't get actually deployed for like another year.
Yeah, I didn't watch most of it. The only part I watched was a short clip of that. It was probably a senator, it was a representative who said that something about he was like looking forward to the day when there would be some kind of terrorist event that involved Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, so that they could then tie in that regulation with, Bitcoin and stuff. And terrorist financing, like, draw a clear connection. Is like, really? You're wishing for a terrorist event just to go after Bitcoin? That's pretty disgusting.
Yeah.
Well, it was a good thing we had 9/11, or we never would have had the glorious Patriot Act. I mean, it was completely worth it.
And I'm sorry to say, like, I kind of was in the same vein. I was like, oh man, this just doesn't sound like the language that I kind of got aggravated with it too. Is like they're threading the needle to make sure Ethereum isn't security and everything stays proper for that. So I don't know. I kind of got frustrated and dropped out pretty early too. Like, damn, it's one of those things where nowadays, I don't know, it's like you might start seeing more and more of these things, and it's going to be harder to watch all of them because they're usually pretty dull and start to get aggravating fairly easily.
It's kind of ridiculous too. Like it seemed like every congressional member that was there kept trying to walk towards pretty much we need explicit regulations solely for cryptocurrencies. when you really look at the legal precedent so far, there's a very stark dividing line. There's crypto assets that are defined as pretty much an asset or a commodity that aren't controlled or issued by any single party. And then there's assets that are explicitly issued by some definable party. And you have the line of there's commodities over here and there's securities over here. And we have the CFTC, like they monitor and regulate futures or derivative markets, and they have enforcement capabilities in spot markets for commodities. And then we have the SEC, which handles everything regarding securities. So from a regulatory point of view, all the kinds of crypto assets that exist clearly fall under prior existing regulatory frameworks. And yet you still have members in the government trying to establish some kind of new explicit framework to pretty much pretend these are some separate class of things that need their own regulatory oversight.
A few weeks ago, I saw the yet one more iteration of an article that talked about how some kind of digital cash was good for terrorism or drug dealing or whatever. And I looked really hard in the article to see any recognition that, well, the US dollar has been used for those purposes for many decades with great success. What point are they trying to make that somehow digital cash is implied that it's like uniquely valuable for those purposes? Well, sorry guys, that train left the station a long time ago. You don't try to solve a problem that really isn't a new problem. It's basically the problem of terrorism, not the problem of digital cash terrorism. So yeah, they don't get it. We should be fortunate the government is so incompetent, because if they were as competent as they ought to be, they might actually be really, really dangerous. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think that the USD is still like the most preferred by choice when it comes to criminals, because they don't have to do anything with it.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I really think ultimately it just comes down to the fact that they cannot pick and choose selectively for their own interests who are allowed to do these things that they supposedly are attempting to stop. I mean, it's like, it really doesn't take a rocket scientist to look back in American history and see things like the funding of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and painting Osama bin Laden as a freedom fighter one decade. And then the next decade, he is a terrible terrorist and an enemy of America. And it's the second those interests shift, well, in the position they're in now, they can, well, now you're cut off because you're not serving our interests now. And if somebody else is, well, hey, we'll turn a blind eye. And it's just the fact that with Bitcoin and things like it becoming a dominant thing in the world in the long term, they lose that control. Now they are not the selective arbitrators of who is or isn't allowed to participate in the economy.
Yeah, that's why it'd be a great thing to see all this stuff get massively adopted, because I think it could have so many positive effects outward.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like, if you remove like that level of control and things, I mean, I don't think like these issues are going to be as big of an issue as you think. I mean, somebody who would engage in trade with a terrorist, well, if they're willing to facilitate somebody committing violence that is not in self-defense, if they're going to do that, well, they're going to find whatever medium of exchange necessary to allow them to engage in that activity. But I think most people wouldn't do that. And when you really look at the history of these things, it's generally the people who claim to want to stop this or brand things as a threat that are the biggest people engaging in trade with these kind of entities. I mean, like, the US government will scream ISIS is the devil on one hand, and the other hand, they're just shuffling explosives and weapons and ammunition into their hands. I mean, like, I don't see any normal person out there or normal company going and arming ISIS. It's the people who claim to be fighting them.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's definitely the great example there with the Mujahideen. I mean, like, you know, big support article, a freedom fighter, and handing them weapons and everything, and then he becomes the central thesis of a decades-long war that we are still in for some reason. And it's just, I mean, it serves their purpose the best. So, I mean, yeah, it's like one of those things where if we each had more individual power, it would be hard to sort of coalesce that together, I suppose.
And Janine just pulled the screen share up. I mean, this is the perfect example.
Right.
I mean, like,
Yeah, I have this article archived and it's like bookmarked, because if you ever, like, seriously, reality sometimes is so much better at creating cypherpunk dystopias, or cyberpunk dystopias more generally, than, you know, any fiction writer could come up with. If you scroll down to the part where it starts off with the futuristic look of the darkened room may have helped to fire observers' imaginations. Like, the description of what went on there is like so creepy. There's a paragraph where it says the globe did not appear to have any magical powers, because, you know, it possibly could have magical powers. Apparently, New York Times is a bit weird. But when the king and Mr. Trump touched it, background music of the kind that might accompany a reality show's elimination sequence or introduce a cable news program, see, because apparently they can be the same thing, soared and pulsed. The screens glowed with statistical displays and videos about fighting terrorism. An unnamed official who narrated the features of the new control center said the displays use artificial intelligence to track in real time news reports and online statements. So it's like, and I mean, I think most of people here are aware of Saudi Arabia's involvement in, you know, actual terrorism. So the fact that Trump was like at this like super creepy Sauerman-esque ceremony, I have this saved, because I swear to God, if anyone is in the process of writing some kind of like global cyberpunk dystopic novel, this is a scene that they should make reference to, because this is like this is the creepiest thing I've ever read in the past year, or one of the creepiest things.
There's another view too, as well, like from the other side, where you could see all the people sitting there. It looks like a scene from Star Wars, where like there's just everybody sitting there in the same helmets and everything at their desk. Like, what are they doing? I don't know. They're on top of things, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's like they decry terrorism on the one side, and then shuffle money and weapons into one of the biggest funders and supporters of terrorism in the world. I mean, and it, like,
yeah. And the connection to like Saruman's orb is such a perfect connection, because if anyone's familiar with Lord of the Rings, you'd know that Saruman initially was a character that was good. He was on the side of good, and he would use the orb to like see Gandalf or see people who were approaching him and see things. I think he could sometimes see things in the future as well. But basically he started off as a good character, and then this tool of surveillance ended up helping him build his orc armies and help Sauron, who was the main bad character. So it's like a perfect connection with this orb thing and the imagery. Like anyone who had seen Lord of the Rings and like immediately thought of Saruman's orb and all of that. It's like perfect connection.
And I think I'm gonna do another rapid fire story series. Otherwise, we're gonna be sitting here for another 2 hours. But all
right, bud.
Thank God things seem to be topically clustered today. I guess first off, we didn't cover it on the show, but I'm sure everybody heard of the large theft of mining hardware in Iceland over the last month. Well, that's happened again in Quebec. And I know the screen share is all in French. I need to find a translating plugin that actually works. But pretty much the two thieves sprayed bleach in the face of the owners and stole around $800,000 of mining equipment. You can see the police taking possession of the truck it was loaded into here. And it's it's kind of fucked up. Last year, we started seeing instances of kidnapping and burglary and so on, attempting to pretty much take possessions of people's cryptocurrencies. And now we're starting to see a pattern, I guess, develop with people stealing mining hardware. So, I mean, it's regardless of whether you're just holding cryptocurrencies, you're mining, I mean, security is important, especially with like potentially millions of dollars of hardware sitting somewhere. That's something that needs to be dealt with. And real quick also, Plattsburgh, New York has placed a moratorium on Bitcoin mining. And to be clear here, they're not banning it. They're just pretty much setting up a moratorium on new operations being set up at the time, because effectively this town is powered off of a hydroelectric dam that produces about 104 megawatt hours per month. And it's very cheap rates for people. I think the normal person pays maybe 4 cents a kilowatt hour. And for businesses, this is why miners went there, I think it's only 2. And they actually overshot the capacity of the hydro plant last month and had to start purchasing electricity at a much higher market rate. And this was pretty much spread around spread around between everybody living in the town. And so I think this is going to be a little bit of a shitstorm for local residents for a while. Although I will note at the end, an operator of one of the larger mining companies in the town has said that they're perfectly willing to kind of eat the higher rate when they go over the capacity of the hydro plant if that becomes an occurrence. So I think, people are kind of throwing this article around and screaming the mining bans are coming. I think honestly this is probably just going to work itself out, where they set up some kind of arrangement where any overages are not going to just pretty much be socialized across the entire population of the town. And sorry for the ranting. Last one. Surprise, guys. Monero ASICs. What? Bitmain is selling them right before they do a proof of work change on Monero to pretty much make these ASICs useless. They totally weren't just mining in secret, were they? Oh, wait. There was a huge hash rate spike in December that was unexplained. The developers start talking about changing the proof of work algorithm so that ASIC chips, if they're out there, wouldn't work anymore. And Bitmain magically puts these all up for market sale right before that's about to happen. Okay, rant over.
Right. So when I was looking, especially the way that you clustered these things together is perfect. The issue is that as the security costs for mining continue to go up, it's going to create a decentralizing influence, because you can't have $2 million of mining hardware without having a guy with a rifle standing there. It just doesn't make sense. And a lot of these jurisdictions, you can't even have a guy standing there with a rifle. Canada has some really weird and strange gun laws. You might be able to have a guy standing there with a rifle, but he's only allowed to have like 5 bullets. So if the bad guys show up with 7, there you go. Thanks, Canada. So as these costs become more and more of an issue, and I think they will over time, it's going to make small mining operations, and especially anonymous mining operations, more cost effective. So it's one of those stories like the hackers coming after centralized exchanges, right? Like I don't like the fact that people are going to lose money and there's bad guys out there, but it does highlight the reason that these things were designed the way that they were in the first place, to be secure, because they're anonymous and they're hidden and they're decentralized. So we're going to have more decentralized exchanges. We're going to have more small anonymous miners. We're going to have more miners that are running on solar or some other form of power where they're not leaking out their identity to potential hackers or potential bad guys, I should say. And for what it's worth, I don't see any distinction between having your front door kicked in and having all your miners taken, or having somebody say, well, we're going to charge you 20 times more for the electricity than we're going to charge the neighbor. Right? At the end of the day, it's still theft and extortion, and whether it comes from a government or it comes from whoever these guys were that stole the miners, the effect is the same, right? Like you can debate the morality if you really feel like it. I don't see a distinction there either, but the net effect is, as security costs go up, as trying to keep your stuff from being stolen or being extorted legally or morally or otherwise becomes a bigger and bigger issue, we're going to see more decentralization. So we just got to be patient, and doing something like a proof of work change like Cobra's been pushing for, and other folks that may be a little bit more just naive about the effects. It's not going to be good for us, and we're going to be in the exact same situation that the Monero guys are in, and that is somebody can develop an ASIC in secret and completely dominate the network if we do a proof of work change. So we really can't do that. We just have to hold out and keep pushing hard for commoditization of mining hardware. And that couldn't be happening faster. I mean, the way you do that is you throw a lot of money at the industry, and other entrepreneurs smell those profits and go after them. So that's happening rapidly. Let's just let the market do what the market does, and commoditize that hardware for us.
Right. Like this, yeah, it was a good bunch right there, because, it's like that Plattsburgh story, that moratorium, because, it's like we're saying with these mining incentives, places with cheap power, the miners are going to show up there and they're commoditizing that power, and, certainly could be an effect on the townspeople as far as like what, the allotted power and how that all works out, and just, how exactly that plays out. This is just sort of like that organic growth of mining, and the people that were kidnapping people that were in charge of exchanges and hacking exchanges and everything. Now we're seeing a move into the mining equipment, and and just the ASIC for Monero was really just kind of threw me, where I was just like, well, damn, now you really can't ever say that you're going to be resistant to ASICs, because like JW is saying, there's so much money in this space now, to where, I mean, like if you develop anything, I mean, like, you can pretty much be assured there's going to be an ASIC right behind it. And when can you say that chain is those ASICs have been activated? I mean, I guess you could do what Fluffy Pony did there and say, well, that spike in hash rate shows like, that's probably when those ASICs came online. But I don't know. It just is one of those things where like Litecoin was trying to be ASIC resistant. That didn't happen. The ASICs tracked him down. I mean, Monero's kind of got a hard fork every year policy to try and avoid ASICs, but then I don't know. It's like the ASIC shows back up, and now they're still going to hard fork, and like you're saying, these ASICs are pretty much useless. I'm sure that chain's been controlled for a while now by Bitmain, and now that this happens, now they're talking about hard forking every 6 months. Like I don't know. I just feel like Monero is about to get split up into so many different ways, and the idea of avoiding an ASIC is just going to show like it's I don't know. It's something where I guess over time we'll start to see it won't happen.
Yeah, I definitely I predict a split in this fork. I really do. I mean, not only is it going to be pretty much the rational move for any sucker who actually buys this hardware, that's going to be useless on the forked Monero chain. I mean, anecdotally, I've seen a large number of Bitcoin Cash supporters / big blockers kind of move in and invest in Monero and start being active in the Monero community over the last year, because
specifically the last few months,
really going their way. And just it's the potential in here to just kind of whip up an argument for continuing the pre-proof of work change Monero chain, and kind of the alignment that a lot of these big blockers have with Bitmain and Jihan now being in the Monero community. Like, I would personally be very shocked if this does not lead to a split in the Monero chain and two chains progressing forward from that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that too. I mean, it's just like, what are you going to do with these miners, man? I mean, they're going to be mining that chain. And I mean, like the development supposedly moving over to this new one, and and then I don't know. It's like, okay, there's a trip up now, and there's all sorts of problems coming up, and the idea of like trying to stay ASIC resistant, it's just like now it's pretty much null in my mind. Like that like the idea of what Monero was doing sort of seemed like maybe that could work, but then this story came up, and it's like, well, damn, I don't think that's possible anymore. So it's an interesting story development.
And really, I really want to remind anybody who is holding Monero right now that this is not just like Bitcoin Cash. This is not just free money. You will completely destroy your privacy for yourself and for everybody else using Monero if you start moving your coins on both sides of a chain split. Because the way that it obtains privacy is grabbing other outputs and mixing them with yours randomly to obscure which output is actually money you have spent in that transaction. And if there are two chains, you're not going to wind up with the same other outputs mixed in if you go to move your coins. So using your coins on both sides of a chain split with Monero will rapidly deteriorate the privacy properties of both chains for everybody to some degree. And it will be worse the more people do it. So that this is not just free dividends, yay. This could completely destroy the privacy gain from Monero if a split happens and people start collecting money on both sides.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where I think maybe they're going for that whole webbot model of like webbot model mining, to try and some like do advertising and stuff. But it's like, I don't know how that's gonna work whenever this these ASICs are just gonna be right on your heels. So I don't know. It's something where it's in the past couple months I've kind of been disillusioned, like with what you're saying, as far as like people showing up in the Monero space and like the way that's all been playing out, and then to see this and then see Fluffy Pony talking about how great Decred's voting mechanisms are and all that. It's just like, oh man, what is going on, man? This thing is being fractured all to hell. So I don't know. This is just the war of the blockchain wars, I guess.
I'd like to mention that for a few years, I've occasionally thought about the idea of replacing the hash function. Not that I could do it myself, of course, but what do you need lots of CPU power in today's world? Well, the one thing that you really would need it for is weather forecasting. It would be nice, and maybe this is just a matter of wishful thinking, if they could, in effect, replace their hash function with some kind of distributed weather forecasting function. Of weather forecasting, you have to split up the surface of the earth into billions of little volume, I don't know what you'd call them, a voxel, and effectively everybody would be doing a little bit of simulation. That might actually turn what would otherwise be a wasteful burning of energy into a not so wasteful useful function. But I don't claim to have the kind of expertise to be able to do this. I just have enough knowledge to just be aware of the conceivable possibility. It'd be nice if the change could be made.
Yeah, we've actually had some people spin up some projects like that, including Richard Hart recently, who's kind of Bitcoin Dracula.
We got to follow those proteins.
Yeah. The problem with that is that as much as you produce stuff that is economically useful, like an asset that you could sell, weather prediction or fluid dynamic data, all of that actually can be used to attack the network. All those resources. So you really do need a hashing algorithm or a proof of work that only produces security for your blockchain. Otherwise, you're not really accomplishing what you need to. But it's an interesting idea. I was going to have Shinobi throw up a document that I've been working on around proof of work changes. And my plan here was just to go through and show that show what the effects are on each of the different participants in the network if we do a proof of work change. And this is not Bitcoin specific, right? It applies to Monero as well. And since Monero seems to be considering doing a proof of work change regularly, all right, yeah, it's fine. Anyway, there's a section in the document that's specifically about the effects of an unexpected or an expected regular proof of work change. It's about 2/3 of the way down. So if you want to, yeah, there you go. So if you want to know what's going to happen to Monero as a result of going down this path, read that. Maybe I made a mistake and you can give me some feedback, but they all seem to be negative effects. There doesn't seem to be any benefit to either a one-off proof of work change or a scheduled regular proof of work change, or just making people convinced that you're going to do it on a regular, it doesn't matter if it's every 6 months or every 6 weeks, it's not going to have positive effects either way.
Man, like, what do you do with such a fractured network at that point?
I mean, yeah, it kind of sucks. Although I kind of jokingly tweeted at Fluffy the other day, link to the CNBC mention of Monero. Like, no, it wasn't supposed to end like this. Not like this, but hey, Bitmain is a much more fitting way for Monero to get train wrecked. I'm glad it wasn't Brian Kelly that brought you down, Fluffy.
He called Monero fluffy ponies. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, if anybody wants to take a look at it, it's at github.com/JW Weatherman. And Fluffy Pony, if you're listening, take a look, man. It's not going to be good.
Yeah, I'll toss the link to that in the show notes when we get off the air. But in the interest of time, because I think we are going to have to cut a story or two until next episode, let's move along to Blockstream, AXA Core, the Illuminati Masters are releasing their latest scheme. Liquid, the commercial sidechain, has hit its first release candidate network and is now officially out of beta. For those of you who don't know what this is, first off, I'm disappointed in you. But it's pretty much a federated sidechain that has a number of functionaries effectively signing blocks in a quorum with a threshold that has to be met for a block to be considered valid on the sidechain. And pretty much the entire rationale behind it is a federation of exchanges in the ecosystem can pretty much lock a number of coins in their custody into this sidechain, and then give customers access to that for much faster and private transfers between exchanges to trade the arbitrage between the different prices. They've actually implemented confidential transactions on the sidechain itself, so that pretty much there's no ability for any participants at a certain exchange to notice where money is flowing and attempt to kind of front run that or kind of disrupt the process of trading. And this is, I think, going to be pretty awesome. I mean, they've updated the main chain functionaries to be able to handle SegWit, streamlined the pegging in and out process, and have also simplified a procedure using check sequence verify, kind of a relative lock time, to give exchanges the ability to pull their funds out in the unlikely event of a catastrophic failure of the chain. So that if, for instance, the chain stops functioning, all of the exchanges who have put some of their liquidity into it are able to pull the money out. There's nothing except a loss in time, and you won't actually see funds be lost. But I think this is I don't know. I don't think this is going to solve everything in terms of block space use, but I do think that whenever you can get volume out of the main chain that doesn't necessarily need to be there because of for instance, custodial models, like an exchange, they are holding your money. And if you transfer from one exchange to another, at no point in that process are you ever gaining control of the coins directly again. So why not move them through something like a sidechain such as this, where it's not eating up block space, things can be confirmed faster to allow traders to act more quickly, and just kind of move towards using the blockchain space more efficiently. Like if you don't have an actual need to transfer your coins using the main chain, then why not use something else? I mean, there's efficiency gains for you and efficiency gains for everybody else in you freeing up space for other uses.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see this news, just because Liquid and these federated side chains is something that I really believe will be powerful in the future when it comes to scaling Bitcoin, and like the ability for competitive markets to arise, and just like really see some interesting things like you're saying, like this with Lightning. I mean, like that's really where I kind of see the future of Bitcoin going as far as scaling, and just to see these things like actually pop out, and like the development is this is where the things going on Bitcoin. That's where it's like it's really fascinating stuff. It's not just talked about for a long time without something ever showing up. It's like we finally we get these release candidates and people get it in their hands and they start working with it, and we can start seeing even more developments coming up in the future, maybe on what exactly these federated side chains will be used for, and everything like all that. It takes these release candidates and betas and all this sort of stuff in the real development before those upgrades can be made. And I mean, it's just like that's why it's awesome. I don't know, it's awesome to see that it's out here and people can get it in their hands and work with it.
It's recognizing the different kinds of trust models involved in different activity and optimizing for that. Like, for instance, if you have a group of actors who regularly interact with each other economically, and pretty much the only way to do so right now is directly through the main Bitcoin blockchain, while it's a group interacting with each other, if you can take that group and distribute trust between them in a way where none of them can rip each other off, and then move that volume of activity between them into like a walled garden setup in that way, well, then there's no real material change from their point of view. Like it's set up in a way where nobody can screw anybody else over. There's an efficiency in being able to actually confirm and transfer control of assets much more quickly. And then you have the side benefit of freeing up space in the commons so that the main blockchain can be used for other people who are not in this situation of static trust relationships interacting with each other and need that immediate guarantee of finality in things. And pretty much like this is being applied right now specifically for the case of traders performing arbitrage. But I think that there are much more use cases you can find where it makes sense to kind of establish that trust model in its own equilibrium, building on top of Bitcoin instead of just directly eating up block space.
Yeah, it's definitely the more reasoned approach when it comes to scaling out this tech. It's going to be awesome to see. I'm honestly I've been waiting to work on something, but it requires federated side chains and everything. So this is awesome.
Mm-hmm. And then if one thing that haters said was never going to come wasn't enough, bam! Lightning Network mainnet beta. LND 0.4 is ready for use. And boy, this is fucking awesome.
Oh yeah, man.
I will say though, I will reiterate the warning that this has been ironed out. They have fixed a number of bugs, but it is still a beta, so don't go rush and throw your entire life savings in Bitcoin into Lightning channels. Like play with small amounts. Like there, as unlikely as it is, there is still the potential for bugs or things to go wrong. So be grateful.
That's what I was just looking. How did I miss that when I was looking through this? I missed the Grateful gang. That's awesome.
But big note things is this can plug into Bitcoin D now, so you no longer need to download an alternative client. There is a new seed format specifically for Lightning clients. People can go look up on the LND repo, Roast Beef's proposal for this. It's pretty much geared towards making revalidating something from scratch a little more efficient, so you're not scanning through parts of the blockchain you don't have to. They've increased the fault tolerance so that a client dealing with a software crash, a power failure, isn't losing data. So they're making sure that everything is kind of check marked at each point in the process so that there is absolute minimal risk of any state being lost in a failure like that. Smarter pathfinding. They've automated the logic that the wallet uses as far as how to handle individual outputs, and it will attempt to batch transactions in any event, so multiple channels closing at once. You get a little more efficiency there. They have removed support for non-SegWit addresses, so everything by default closed out of a channel will be sent to a SegWit address, as well as any on-chain transactions it handles. And they have improved a tool set for those who actually want to run nodes to help route payments. The idea being to kind of help you maximize fee return. And one last thing I want to point out real quick before JW goes out of the roadmap ahead is atomic multi-path payments. As I have said many times, if one channel with a route to whoever you're wanting to pay does not have enough liquidity for the entire payment, you can use multiple ones at once. There is no need for a single Lightning Network payment to only take a singular path through the Lightning Network. So, woo!
Yeah, totally. This is great. It's real solid progress on a really, really hard problem. And this is why Bitcoin is great. And I won't comment about everything else, but let's just say it's not great. So I'm really happy about this. The one thing that I wanted to say, well, I guess there's a few things I wanted to say about kind of Lightning in general, is that I know that there's going to be a lot of feedback over the next year that, Lightning was poorly timed because there's not a ton of market demand, right? Like micropayments is a hard thing to get a ton of people to adopt. But I don't think there's any question that over the next decade, we are going to see the internet rebuilt on top of micropayments and replace advertising, because it makes sense. It's a much better user experience. It's a much better way to have content creators create content that's directly for their audience, and it's better from a privacy standpoint. So, we've been hoping to do something like this. I'm sure Jim remembers people talking about this 30 years ago, but Lightning really does represent the first time that the technology is available to make that possible. And I think that's going to be a catastrophic sort of shift in the internet. Maybe 95 was the year, I think Jim said, where when he's looking back, that's like the pre and post internet year. I think 2018, 2019 is going to be the pre and post Lightning year. And it might take a couple years longer, but it's going to be that big of a deal. And the other thing is that, that it's okay if it takes a while for adoption. I know that there's money being raised and there's expectations around that to be able to hit numbers and that sort of thing. But Lightning's most important role is to improve the privacy and security of Bitcoin. And really, even more important than that, it's just to help people understand that they should invest in Bitcoin, that it's a strong piece of technology, that the alternatives are retarded and they're just sort of vaporware. And as more people understand that and more people invest in Bitcoin, we're getting that much closer to having a secure money. And that's the game changer. Like once we have a secure money, the whole world operates differently and we're going to all be far more productive. So that's why this is badass and will be historical.
Yeah, man. Like, I can't you know, I could feel like you could go on forever about like maybe the possible use applications for Lightning in the future. And yeah, I mean, like there will probably be a time in the future where we look back and say like, yeah, this is pre and post Lightning. And, you know, just like thinking about just like on Twitter, you know, the questions about spam and all that sort of stuff. And, you know, the ability to make these micropayments and have some sort of finality with a settlement that you know is true. I think it's all going to play out to be really amazing developments as far as the future goes.
I remember about 1995 when I'd pretty much first gotten on the internet, and the problem of spam was starting up, really. I had an idea, why couldn't everybody who sends email send with the email a little payment? And the idea would be that, well, if it's a junk mail, they don't want to spend a lot of money with the email the payment. But if somebody wants to sell you, let's say, a Cadillac, they might actually be willing to send $1 in their email to motivate you to actually read it. Now, of course, the mechanism for actually doing that did not exist then, and it hardly exists even today. But I remember thinking, I wish there was a mechanism like that, because, of course, you would exempt your friends or something. You'd put them on a favored email recipient list. But if you could somehow attach money to every email, you could separate out the ones that you really wanted to read from the ones that you didn't. If somebody's willing to pay me $1 to read an email, I'll read an email, you know, because it might only take a minute and I might be interested in it. If they're willing to spend that much money to have me read it, it's probably fairly important. And I wish that could have been implemented long ago.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about, Jim. This is, I know enough about the technology. I know enough about, Bill Gates wrote about that. He had a book where that was like the thing that was like the hot topic. And that was probably 15 years after you were having this conversation and thinking about this problem. Hashcash, the whole concept that Adam Back came up with, was to solve that problem. But yeah, spam in and of itself is one major problem that applies to Twitter, it applies to email, it even applies to network traffic, right? And at this moment, this is the first time in history where there's even a piece of technology, a good paper, and something that's actually running in code. It's a release candidate. Like, you can move money around right now and it will work to do all of the things that we've been hoping for. And it's been, 40, 50 years in the making. So yeah, we could do that now, Jim. Give us like 2 more years, man, and it'll be live.
Awesome.
And it's not happening on any other network. It's on Bitcoin. It's not on freaking Zcash with a bunch of retards running around in airplanes, and we got to trust that they didn't keep their password, or Monero, where they're just grabbing the scraps of Bitcoin and putting it off as if it's an innovation. It's happening on Bitcoin.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and like the one thing that I really like about sorry, go ahead, Ginny.
One thing I specifically wanted to point out about the release, because I guess some people were taking issue with the fact that it only uses SegWit addresses now. Clearly you were not listening when SegWit was being adopted, that one of the reasons we have SegWit is because it solved transaction malleability, and that enabled things like Lightning Network. Lightning Network would not exist without SegWit. Or at least if it did exist, because apparently Bitcoin Cash wants to do its own Lightning Network, it would be a lot more inefficient. It would have transaction malleability as a bug. It would be a lot harder to do. So if anyone is like complaining about the fact that it's like, oh, SegWit was supposed to be opt-in, why are you forcing us to use it on Lightning Network? It's like, because Lightning Network works because of SegWit.
Right. So, when I saw that little tidbit, I was just thinking, I didn't know Lightning could be implemented on, without SegWit. So, like tested and all that. But made perfect sense to me. But yeah, it's an odd argument to come at it.
Well, it can, but it's much more efficient. You can only have a channel open for a static amount of time, and then there's still the potential for pretty much having your money destroyed through transaction malleability. So the idea of doing Lightning without SegWit is frankly laughable and retarded. But I mean, like, the one last thing I want to comment on is with Lightning Labs, I am so happy to see they did not pull an ICO. They did not go to some huge VC firm. They took private investment from high net worth individuals. Jack Dorsey, David Sachs of PayPal, Vlad Tenev of Robinhood, all personally invested money into Lightning Labs. And given my experience with the people working there and Elizabeth Stark, I think this $2.5 million is going to go quite a ways to actually getting deployable, solid software out there, because they are not the type of people who are going to go waste money on stupid nonsense or frivolous things or unnecessary trips places. They're going to use it to actually fund development, and they're not beholden to anybody except the private individuals and the terms that they took that investment with. So I am very happy to see them take a more common sense approach to raising money from my point of view.
Definitely so. And yeah, I saw in that list that Charlie Lee also donated to them. I didn't want to get too much into that, but I mean, it's just something where it's like, I don't know. Here recently, I feel like we've been giving him a whole lot of crap ever since JW's been tuning me in on some stuff, but does do the right thing with some of the funds. So proper development.
Well, and another investor I think it would be important to point out is Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter.
Right.
I think that's probably the biggest deal because, as many of us probably already know, Twitter is one of the biggest websites in terms of where conversation about cryptocurrencies is occurring, at least publicly. Obviously, there's probably a lot more going on privately, but publicly, I think it's one of the centralized points of discussion. And so the fact that apparently Jack Dorsey, because he's also the CEO of Square, and obviously that's gotten a little bit into cryptocurrencies, but apparently this is his first investment into a cryptocurrency company with Lightning Labs. So that's interesting because I think Twitter in general is just it's trying to find a revenue model, and so far it hasn't really found one outside of advertising. And I guess in some cases, they're not directly doing it, but I guess some people at Twitter are making money from selling verification, but obviously that doesn't benefit Twitter as a whole. So I guess they're desperate. They're desperate to find a revenue model, and it would make sense if they adopted some kind of like Lightning Network micropayments thing where maybe what happens is you like a particular person on Twitter or like what they tweet, and so you want to make a micropayment donation to them, and part of that micropayment donation automatically goes to Twitter as well, and so the most influential people are making money, but they're also like part of that goes to Twitter. So that wouldn't surprise me if that was something he was thinking along the lines of, because I don't really see, unless it's purely just a personal interest for him to be getting into Lightning Network, I don't really see a reason why Twitter or someone like him would take an interest in Lightning Network.
Totally. Jim, if you haven't gotten on Twitter yet, imagine a huge email thread where the spam is like in the same email. So every time you say a comment about something interesting, some jackass is in there trying to get you to buy his ICO or his his manhood extension device or something. So Twitter definitely needs to solve the spam problem, and the CEO investing, I think, is I hope it's related, not just to give them a revenue model, but so that we can actually have a forum that makes sense again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I haven't.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Jim.
I haven't dared dip my toe into the Twitter universe yet. I don't know. It sounds more like a time sink for both the recipient and the sender. If I had to talk to people on an hourly or minutely basis, yeah, maybe so. But so far, I don't have that kind of need to contact people or have people contact me.
pretty essential here.
I
in
get
the
depressed
crypto.
if people don't pay attention to me for 5 minutes.
Speaking of Twitter, who wants to look at a crypto influencers list that just came out recently? Most
Oh my
influential
God,
Twitter
no,
accounts.
Oh, please no.
I think it's just. I think it's just funny because this is actually one of the. I hate the term influencer. I don't like it. I think most of it is bullshit. But this guy who made this one actually has. If you go to, he has a blog post about how he actually made the algorithm that ranks people, and it's actually a lot. It's a lot better than most, because most of them are just like, oh, this person has 500,000 followers. That means they go at the top, and it's like,
problem.
It's actually
Vitalik people
I know
should not be on this list.
Yes, but Shinobi, you have to understand that the list. The first, I can give a basic explanation. The list is not only based on number of followers; it's based on how many followers, how much attention are the followers getting. So if you're influencing other influential people, then your score is higher. That's part of it. That's not the entire story. But the reason Vitalik is on there is because he has 600,000 followers, so he gets a lot of attention. What I find particularly hilarious is that Elizabeth Stark is actually ahead of Roger Ver. I love that. Good. That's so good. That is so because like it's not very often that you actually have an influencer list where people with not so many followers as others get ranked so much higher. Like there are people with like tens of thousands of followers, like farther down the list in the 300s or 200s, and they have a lot more followers than some of the people on this part of the list. But I like the fact that Elizabeth is up there.
I'm triggered. What is Laura Shin doing here? Why is she on this list?
Because she's at Forbes.
She has literally no idea how anything in this space works.
Well, neither does Vitalik.
Vitalik actually does. He is just disingenuous and naive. He is disingenuous and naive in what he thinks will work. But he does at least understand conceptually. Like Laura Shin does not understand anything. When she has it brought to her attention that things she has published are just objectively, factually incorrect, she just ignores you. Like journalists like that should not be on this list. Like it's insulting.
Shinobi, I know. First of all, it should be clarified there was no human influence into this list. It was purely based on an algorithm connecting to the Twitter API. This was not organized by a person.
The algorithm's retarded.
Right? How come?
Yeah, but Shinobi, you have to understand that
I don't see Janine on there. I don't see JW on there. I don't see either. Y'all three are like scam. You're like, I'm like legit. Like I barely want to tip my nose in the Twitter sphere. Like I just sit there and read everything, and I see y'all's tweets, and y'all are freaking relevant. And like how y'all are not on here, but these other people's are. I mean, like I don't know how they came to this list, but it seems like they have in that algorithm to specifically leave out Block Digest folks because y'all are freaking matter, man.
No.
We don't.
It's not.
No, we don't.
Look, guys. Okay, first of all, I think this is because the fact that we're getting angry about this is important because I think one of the biggest misconceptions about influencer lists or influencers in general is that because they influence people, that makes their opinions correct or their judgments are sound. That is not the case at all. This list is purely based on who gets the most attention. Like the basically the way that the guy who made this algorithm defines influence is how many people are paying attention, how many of these people and to what degree do their actions, how likely is it that these people are going to change the behavior of lots of people in terms of like not only capital resources like money, but social capital as well. And so that's how he came up with this algorithm, is people who get attention, but also are the most likely to change behavior and influence where capital goes. And so, yes, it is completely true that there are people on this list who don't know shit what they're talking about. That's not the point of influencer lists. And I think that's one of the misconceptions that should probably be addressed especially in this space, is that just because someone has a lot of followers does not automatically mean that their opinions are worth listening to or that they're correct. It just means a lot of people are paying attention to them. So I just thought it was interesting to share, because most of the influencer lists are not based on any kind of like, they're not connecting really to an API other than to look at how many followers an account has. This one kind of got into the whole, you know, what influence is from a definitional standpoint. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, maybe we need some better definitions in between all this stuff, because yeah, it seems like I don't know. That was a pretty good list of just like a broad spectrum of all the voices, it seemed like, whenever I looked at it.
Alrighty, before I get angry, I'm gonna find something else to get angry about. Brian,
Oh man,
why did you make a deal with the devil, Brian? Why is OpenBazaar taking money from Bitmain, Brian? I'm sorry. Like come on, man. Like this company is toxic. Like and let me be clear here. When I start giving shit, I like Brian Hoffman. I get where he's coming from. I do not share that same like or respect for any of the other people in the OpenBazaar team, but I like Brian. But it's like, come on, man. Like, you literally took money from Satan to keep building out something that is frankly here way too early. Like, there is not enough market penetration of cryptocurrencies. There's not enough people with cryptocurrencies in their hands, so to say, for this kind of thing to make sense at a large scale, to have a decentralized marketplace. And you're literally taking money from the Satan of the Bitcoin space to keep trying to build this out too early. Like, why?
yeah, I don't know. This was one of those things where just like the token sale, when they said they were going to do that, when you see, it was kind of disappointing. And then this, it's just disappointing. And I mean, but you know, I don't know. It's like Brian, you know, like you're saying, he's a nice guy, like his little funny videos he posts every now and again. And, you know, I'm not, you know, I don't know. I just didn't feel like that whole, like, you're trying to be the Amazon of crypto, not so much anymore. It's just like, you're just trying to fundraise and get as much possible as you can while this whole thing's being developed, because that's not the right way to go about it. Like you're saying, I mean, it feels like, you know, you would understand like that centralization risk is huge and everything. And just bringing that into, I mean, like the token thing was like, okay, maybe you're doing a fiduciary duty, but this is like yeah, I don't know. It's all just a little too much piled on to OB1, where, you know, feels like if they were really trying to be the Amazon of crypto, they would, you know, be slow to scale out and everything, just like the way, you know, this space works. But scaling up is important for businesses and traditional markets, and it sounds like they're still going that traditional route.
Mm-hmm. All right, I guess you want to take us through this SEC development with a certain executive being caught red-handed, Janine? Janine.
Yeah, sorry, I was talking in the troll box. Yeah, so so one of the very early episodes of Block Digest, a lot of the early episodes, I was talking a lot about the Equifax hack, or the Equifax hack. It's still pretty much the biggest disaster ever in terms of data security. Still feeling the effects. But this is really interesting because there was a rumor going around, which I think we talked about briefly, at least in one episode, that the chief information officer, or former chief information officer of Equifax, there was a rumor going around that he had basically committed insider trading, and he had sold off his stock options prior to the hack being announced publicly. So not prior to the hack, just prior to it being announced publicly. Obviously, the announcement of that made Equifax's stock price drop. So anyone who sold off before that happened, obviously, made a profit. And according to a lot of the news articles I've seen, he basically made about $1 million selling off his stock, and he avoided $117,000 in losses, at least according to the SEC. And so now he is being investigated for insider trading, which does not surprise me at all, because from what I could tell, the rumors that this had happened seem pretty credible. I mean, you don't just randomly have, you know, someone higher up in the company, especially to do with information security. If you're the chief information officer, that's what you deal with. And so anyone who would have advanced knowledge of that information would, you know, obviously be privy to, you know, wanting to protect their financial assets related to that company. So it doesn't surprise me at all. I wish, because now he's a former chief information officer, so he's not at the company, which means this won't really have repercussions for Equifax, because Equifax was given a deal with the IRS to handle their identity verification platform or service that they're either currently building or they have one already built and they want Equifax to handle that. So that's pretty disgusting. I would much prefer that more people involved in Equifax would get punished, just besides the chief information officer for insider trading, which, you know, we've debated for whether that's a crime or not. But yeah, I would definitely prefer that more attention to be paid to Equifax, and the fact that, you know, they've just been given more access to people's personal information, and they haven't demonstrated that they have any clue how to handle that effectively. Because as everyone, maybe most people aren't aware, but Equifax has had data breaches before, and they've changed their name. They've been involved in scandals before, and that, you know, that happens with a lot of companies. They get involved in scandals and then they wait a few years, change their name, and then they're back in business. Yeah, so this doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, I don't know, it's like it was such a big deal, and we are still seeing that fallout just continue to keep coming out. It's like it's worse and worse. And so I mean, like, these insider trading cases, they're usually hard to come by because I suppose it's so hard to prove and everything. However, I suppose this one is just like, it's such a big disaster that I guess some accountability is needed.
And, you know, this is, I mean, guys, I'm really disappointed that this hack was not the big wake-up call for a large part of the world's population, that incompetent morons are not the people to trust all of your private financial information with. I mean, but
I don't know what
Well,
that's
yeah,
gonna take.
maybe you should try not trusting your private financial information to anyone, regardless of their competence.
Yeah, I feel like it's going to take some major thing where that actually happens, where, I don't know, everybody wakes up on election day and they already voted or something like that, where it's like, what happened to my identity and the information that I thought was secure? Then maybe they'll wake up. I don't know.
Yeah, have you noticed that, like, the most confident or the most competent people in terms of data security are often the same people who are saying, do not give your data to anyone, don't give it to me, we don't want to hold it, we want as little as possible. Like, the most competent people know you can't keep it safe, you should give out as little as possible.
Yep. My optimism about all this stuff is greatly bolstered by the fact that 20 years ago, I was trying to get people to use smart cards for access, and it was just such a nightmare. Like, nobody wanted to do it. It was too much of a hassle. It wasn't worth it. Passwords worked just fine. But now everybody knows smart cards as hardware wallets, and they're selling by the, you know, hundreds of thousands. So we're making good progress.
All right, last two stories up. Let's go. So I'm sure everybody has seen this. Binance has a $250,000 USD equivalent bounty for any information leading to the capture and prosecution of the hacker who not only completely failed to successfully steal money from them, but also wound up leaving them with some of theirs in the scheme where they deposited money and tried to pretty much pull a pump and dump to run off with the profits by hijacking other people's account through a third-party trading bot host. So all the other exchanges out there, you should take note of this and maybe follow their example. And another piece of news from Binance is they're actually taking a stab at a decentralized exchange. Pretty much the gist of this is they want to take their Binance coin and actually integrate it into its own independent blockchain, which I'm presuming they want to use as kind of a foundational level to organize atomic swaps between different assets. And I mean, this is a awesome direction to see things going in, because while it's obviously going to be a long road of incremental steps, any progress towards decentralizing the actual marketplace exchanges that handle liquidity and price finding for these markets is something that is sorely needed in the long term. And so I haven't really familiarized myself much with Binance. I mean, I'm kind of particular to the exchanges I trade at, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. But I do wish them the best of luck in this, because anybody out there who can successfully decentralize the trading infrastructure in this space is going to not only be providing immense value for the space as a whole, but pretty much blazing the trail for hopefully others to follow after the fact. So, I mean, especially looking at the Lightning beta dropping, I see a lot of cool puzzle pieces that are probably going to be fit together sometime in the near future.
Yeah, right. It's like Binance is one of those exchanges that has kind of just always eluded me. It's like we're saying, you kind of got exchanges and everything, and then I don't know, it's one I hadn't paid much attention to, but yeah, I've started to. I like the idea of just like having a bounty system out there for hacks. That way, kind of discourages it and sort of just discourages that, and the idea of like it's just another. Yeah, I mean, it's taking this idea of a utility token and using it for something to create the development of this decentralized exchange and have a bounty system for the hacks and everything. It's interesting developments, and it's something that, like you're saying, I don't know much about Binance, but I do wish them the best of luck with this, because if it can get developed, it would be a great value to the space.
I wonder if the timing of both of those announcements are interesting. So I'd like to think that they were in a conference room and they were like, how much would we have to make the bounty to incentivize people not to hack us? And somebody said, well, how much do we have in the exchange right now? And that's when the light bulb went off. Like $250,000 not to hack us. I don't know, 100 million, or I don't know what they're kicking around to hack us. Maybe we don't like this equation. And then they thought, all right, it's time to re-architect so that we're not just this massive, filthy honeypot of other people's wealth. I don't know if Coinbase is paying attention, but that's the decision that you guys should be working towards at some point, because that security architecture is absolutely not going to work in the long run.
Right. Like, that's what's great about it. It's like they see a problem, they recognize it, and they're doing steps to develop that process to where it's not an issue anymore. And that's where like things like Coinbase, we kind of see like this just totally go in the other direction.
I think they should change their motto to, you'll want to shill our referral links even when you're a billionaire.
All right.
All right, we want to dive into the last story, get this over with.
All right.
All right, this one's a little old, but bam. This is the funniest shit in the world. 34,200 contracts on the Ethereum platform, smart contracts, are flawed. There are security vulnerabilities in them. And that is around 3% of every contract deployed on the Ethereum network. And real quick in this breakdown, I think they have a nice way of kind of categorizing this. There are prodigal contracts, which are contracts that, if they're attacked, will send funds to the wrong address to try to get them out of the contract for safekeeping. So if you attack them, they're not going to wind up correctly executing the security measure to remove funds from the surface of attack. There are suicidal contracts, which are contracts that can be killed. In other words, the DevOps incident, whoops, I killed it. So the entire contract can be rendered inoperable. And then there are greedy contracts, smart contracts that can be locked and freeze the funds for somebody who's not a party to the contract. And pretty much upwards of 90% of every contract that was hit as a candidate for this was actually found to really have a vulnerability. And so, I mean, like the entire sales pitch of Ethereum is that any JavaScript web developer can plop down and write a smart contract that's going to handle who knows how much economic value. And I think this is a glaring example of why that is not a good thing. You do not want any kid who just got out of a web development program writing code that could potentially wind up handling millions of dollars, because if you screw one thing up, there is no takebacks. The contract is deployed, it's live on the blockchain, and what happens happens.
I think you got to calm down, man. All this hate speech is not helping anybody. This is inappropriate. Your criticism.
Yeah, man. We'll just get Vitalik to roll it back, and it's fine. Like, it's what we always do, right?
Exactly.
That's it.
Yeah. Why do we need these smart contracts to be secure? Vitalik is a nice guy. He has your best interests in mind. He loves you. And if there's a mistake that's made on his network, he'll fix it for you. So just trust him. I don't know what all of this, concern about security is, but the hate speech has got to stop.
Well, one of the things I wanted to, because I was the one who put this article in the news desk, and the reason, as you may have noticed, it's an archive.org link. This article is no longer live anymore, which I found, the reason I put it in there is because I found that really strange, because I think it was published like beginning of March or so. And when I initially went, because I saw a tweet that linked to that article, and when I clicked on it, it wasn't working. And so I went to go and find the article in the archive, because everything is always in the archive. I just found it weird that an article like this had been taken down. Like, it said it had been made private or something. The settings had been changed. And so I don't know why it was taken down. Maybe they released too much information about the vulnerabilities in the contract. I have no idea, but I found it weird that the article had been taken down. I don't think it was because of a mistake, because I tried to find like criticisms of the article and I didn't find anything. So it doesn't look like they had to like take it down because the corrections they had to issue were too massive. So I really don't know why it was taken down. I
think it might have something to do with the fact that it's just like that network is getting too clogged up with all this crap. Like, I go to these meetups, regularly. And here recently, like, I've been hearing a lot from the blockchain guys about how Ethereum's got to take this. They need something to get people evangelized about Ethereum. And it's just like, I'm thinking about it. And like, it's like, I told him, I was like, I thought Ethereum's getting all the developers. I thought that's where all the developers are going, is Ethereum. And the guy was kind of like, well, we're running into some issues now with CryptoKitties and parity and people wanting to develop on Ethereum. And then last night I was at a bar talking to these guys, and one of the guys there is a developer, and he was talking about maybe developing something on an ERC20 token until, got into discussions about this sort of stuff. And he was like, he said it. I was thinking about it, but then I've heard these stories about how, your funds could get frozen and your project just stalls. Like, so he was hesitant and came to this discussion, and we were talking about it. And I don't think he's going to go that route now. And so I think this is all really kind of adding up to a big, big problem with Ethereum, where, it's really starting to see like, if you're going to start a project on Ethereum, there's a very big chance that, like, you know, it might just all fall out from underneath you, not based on anything other than the code and the way that it was put together.
If I had to guess, I'd say they probably got a cease and desist letter. It's really cheap for an attorney to do that. If I was running Ethereum, I would have attorneys just send those out all day long. And it's a big problem with security research in general. If you find a vulnerability and you deal with it the right way, if the company or the organization's shady enough, they just hit you with the cease and desist. It costs you at least a couple $100 to have an attorney even respond, let alone, you know, look at the letter. And it's basically just legal spam, right? And they can take that to a further level. There's been other vulnerabilities that have been dealt with the right way and disclosed publicly, not even related to cryptocurrency, but this is just a very long ongoing problem. And that's why you'll see a lot of people that are that use two different names, right? They publish work under a pen name because they have consulting businesses where they work for big companies, but they can't afford to just be constantly dealing with the nonsense that the bad actors throw at them, you know, from the corporate world. So you have two different personas, and I think that's the way to go. But it still makes it a pain because you publish stuff and then it comes off of those websites, right? Like you tweet something out, and no joke, it ends up getting marked as like hate speech or whatever nonsense, and then just disappears. So it's a big problem.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I guess today's been a long one. So I guess towards the end of the show, we generally kind of like round it off with thoughts on everything, kind of break things down with like something to leave the audience with. And if you have any kind of parting thoughts you want to give everybody, Jim, feel free.
It's complicated. What can I say? I wish I understood it all. I had and still have hopes for Ethereum, the combination of Ethereum and Augur as a prediction mechanism. I won't say exactly why, but I imagine you can probably guess. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, maybe a year or two more. Let's hope so. Somebody ought to do something.
Always. Is there anywhere viewers can find any more information on your new idea regarding pretty much clogging up the federal court system?
Well, the website is the primitive website is fedjusticeshutdown.org. Like I say, it's very primitive. I'm swamped in implementation issues, which is why the website itself has been neglected. What can I do? I'm working as hard as I can, given the fact that I'm limited right now to about one person, me, to do it. I really, what I need is basically introductions to people who might be interested in having what might be called an angel investment role. This is sort of a chicken and egg problem. Once it gets going, it'll generate so much publicity that it will not need donations from small number of people. It'll be a large number thing. But that's a chicken and egg problem. Means you have to have either a chicken or an egg. And where do you go if you don't have a chicken or you don't have an egg? And I'm trying to accomplish something, but it takes time.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I'll be sure to toss that in the show notes, so the link's there for everybody who wants to dive into that. But I guess in the process, as usual, of loading Janine's last thoughts. So let me get these screen shares all set up. All right, ready to go.
Yeah, so this first one, I just thought it was kind of amazing. I saw it as I was looking through my timeline absentmindedly. As Shinobi says, hot.
For the audio only listeners, I can't describe this.
It's a cotton candy eating contest, and this girl thinks right outside the box and just grabs the whole thing, balls it up, and throws it in her mouth and wins in half a second.
Gorgeous.
Well, the smart thing
gorgeous.
the smart thing she does is she just rips it off the stick and then shoves it in her mouth instead of trying to eat it off the stick like the other guy.
Yeah,
And so-
exactly.
Jim is he just doesn't even know what is going on right now.
How does this?
How did the show just take this odd turn?
Yeah. Okay. All right.
This is what you get in Twitter: is you get these amazing things.
Yeah.
Janine is our conversation spammer today.
Yeah. Well, I haven't seen any cotton candy for a few decades, but I was aware of cotton candy 55 years ago. So
All right, Judy, you ready for the next of 4 thoughts? This is a sad one.
Oh yeah, this is bad.
Yeah. So as everyone may have heard, Stephen Hawking died on March 14th, which happened to be Pi Day 2018. I just thought this was the only thing I retweeted on that day. I also saw some tweets about how apparently Stephen Hawking's one of his dreams is that, or his never to be fulfilled dream was he wanted to run his wheelchair over Margaret Thatcher's toes. He's a habit of running over the toes of people he doesn't like. I thought that was pretty good. Yeah, so really sad that he's gone. But to be fair, I mean, he literally, doctors were telling him that he was likely to die like 30 years ago. So the fact that he lived as long as he did, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
So
that's a miracle. I mean,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
next thought.
Yeah, the next one, if you haven't been paying attention to updates in the intelligence community in the United States, the statute of limitations on prosecuting James Clapper for literally lying to Congress under oath, well, that has just expired. So now he can't be prosecuted for lying about the extent of NSA surveillance several years ago. So that's great. That's, not in addition to apparently the CIA has a new director. I think don't actually remember what the position is. Anyway, high-ranking person, or not the CIA. I think Trump actually. I have no idea. Anyway, a high-ranking person who apparently, was part of the whole torture program, is now in another high position in the government. Which, completely skating over the fact that that's completely unconstitutional. Whatever. Separate
And
story.
last thought. He's back.
Oh, you skipped Jack Mallers.
Oh, what? I didn't
missed
see. Did you have 5?
It's
What?
There's one above Dan Darkhill. It's between the Snowden one and the Dan Darkhill one. There you go. Scroll down. There you go. Look, someone put roast beef's face on that meme. That is pretty good.
I'm trying to see those, but they're so small, it's hard to see what's going on here. Can I click on it and expand it? I don't know.
If you hit the X in the corner there where it's saying it's hard to load, it should pop back up. Like not for the window itself, but like under the live button.
Oh yeah. Okay, all right.
You're not missing much. It's basically just a joke about one of the Lightning developers in a GIF. So let's.
All right, I see now. That's good. That's good.
All right, now Dan is back.
Yeah, I didn't really see him explain what the story was of why he left. He just kind of posted some stuff about, I don't know, it was like a picture, and I don't think he actually explained why he left.
It's Dan being Dan. I mean, there's nothing more to say to that.
Oh yeah.
But all right, JW. Here's your thought, Rick. I'm loading yours in a second.
Don't load that one.
We finally, I shouldn't say finally, but we finalized the landing page for for the game that I'm working on to teach kids math and programming and pay them Bitcoin to keep them motivated. So there it is. I still am waiting forever for the domain name to transfer, but when it's done, I'll tell you guys the name and point you to the website.
Mm-hmm.
All
right.
Man. Yeah, I didn't want you to load that tweet up. My final thought was just kind of like piggybacking on Janine's with the Stephen Hawking one. Is like I just saw on Twitter. It's like in this ridiculousness. Like it's just I don't know. It's the sign of the times. It's like people were automatically saying, "Oh yeah, 3.14 pi Stephen Hawking. It's obviously the Illuminati because he found out the Earth was flat, and so that's why he's gone." So apparently, Stephen Hawking realized that the Earth was flat, and Hillary Clinton and the guys next to him out. So that's what the true story is. No, that's totally a joke, man. Enjoy the weekend.
Actually, yeah. Actually, just one more. My favorite tweet about Stephen Hawking was the one from the Tweet of God account where he says that like something like Stephen Hawking's only been here a few hours and he's already convinced me to my face that I don't exist, which I thought was good.
Oh, yeah. It's a wild time we live in.
The internet brings out all the crazies. And I guess my last thought before we sign out, everybody, don't forget what all of this is about. Revolt. And I guess we'll see you next time, guys. Toodaloo.
Later, everyone.
Bye-bye.